agree.
IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. We missed y'all yesterday. We took Sunday off. We're back at it on Monday. It is Monday, which means it's time for the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, Ryan. And I know what you and I have spent our weekend doing. That's basically being on the phone and DMing and texting and calling a bunch of people to try to get the latest on Notre Dame recruiting. Today's show, we're going to update the 2024 board. We were going to dive into 2025 recruiting, but there's been a lot of movement in recruiting in the last few days, Ryan, that we're going to get into. And so we're going to push the 25 start conversation back to next week, which will kind of go in line with sort of our July kickoff of different things that we're doing on the show and on the website. We are not going to dive as deep into the specifics of things in this show as we did on the message board. So if you want to kind of get the even further, some of the juicier details of these recruitments, you're going to want to go to the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But we are going to give you the latest. There are just some juicy details that we're going to leave to the message board. Obviously, Ryan, this weekend, a lot of Notre Dame kids finishing up their recruiting period. A lot of kids are kind of now getting that part of the summer over with. You're now getting ready to go into, I think, a dead period that will end in late July. Notre Dame will have, I believe as of right now, has a late July couple recruiting visits set up. They're going to kind of do their late July barbecue, which this year will be interesting, Ryan. It's going to be right in the middle of camp.
Yeah.
Because Notre Dame starts the season on August 26th, they're actually going to start fall camp probably in late July. So it's going to be very, very interesting. So, Ryan, we've been able to kind of get a read on where things go. There was some good and some not so good this week. And obviously the good, Notre Dame landed Bronte Johnson, which was a huge, huge pickup for Notre Dame. Very, very important pickup. The bad news is, obviously, Ryan, we'll dive into here in a little bit. Things aren't looking so great for Carter Nelson. But we are going to first kick things off because Marcus Freeman says he is an O-line, D-line driven program. So that's where we're going to start, Ryan, with the offensive line. A kid kind of a little bit up north from where you're from, Gary Lambert, canceled a Penn State visit, went to Harvard. His visits are now over. Ryan, what is the latest that we are hearing about where Notre Dame stands with Gary Lambert?
Of course, we're talking about Catholic Memorial, West Roxbury, Massachusetts, offensive lineman Gary Lambert, who is the teammate of 2023 Notre Dame defensive line signing Boubacar Traore. And he's been, whether it was Harry Hiestand or now Joe Rudolph, he's been the top target on the board for Notre Dame at offensive line for several months. And obviously it was a very interesting weekend, Brian, right? I mean, not too often guys cancel a Penn State trip to go to Harvard, but it was obviously a very, I think, telling sign for a guy like Gary Lambert, right? Like, what does Gary Lambert care about? Cares about doing his due diligence and high academics, right? Like those things matter obviously tremendously to him. So he's a kid that I've kind of compared a little bit to Charles Jagasaw, because people always ask about like timeline. When are they going to announce? It's just like Gerby's going to announce when Gerby is ready to announce, right? Like that could be tomorrow. That could have been 2 weeks ago. That could have been 2 weeks from now. Like who knows exactly? But I expect it to be done pretty soon, obviously, with the official visits now over for Gerby. Coming out of it, we feel pretty much the same that we did after his post visit, right? It's that Notre Dame is going to be pretty hard to beat in this one, in our opinions. I think that Notre Dame has positioned themselves in pole position, potentially to close this one out as we move forward after the official visits. And again, their top offensive line target on the board. I think this would be a massive hit for Coach Rudolph, because we thought that he lost a little bit of momentum when he first transitioned to the offensive line coach. And if he's able to now kind of pick the pieces back up and get Gary Lambert into the class, you're looking at back-to-back very good offensive line groups for in 2023 and 2024. So Gerby looking good for Notre Dame right now for Gary Lambert.
Got to close, right? It's not a done deal. It's not a done deal. They've got to close. And so when you look at going into this final stretch, it's going to be important that they can seal the deal here soon. Everything we've heard is very good for Notre Dame. Ohio State put their best foot forward, didn't move the needle. Obviously, there's a lot of people talking about staying close to home. I think that's exacerbated by the visit to Harvard. Everything that we're hearing is very positive for Notre Dame. It's been pretty consistent for about 3 weeks now, Ryan. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's when you start to feel like the intel is good, is when it just kind of stays the same. So we'll see, but they got to close out. And I think it would silence a lot of the sort of the questions and concerns that people have about Joe Rudolph as a recruiter, is if he can get Gary Lambert, because there's no question this has been the top guy on their board for a very long time. I mean, with Harry Hiestand and with Joe Rudolph, the one constant, right? Because there were some changes. Obviously, Coach Hiestand liked Caleb Brewer more, and Coach Rudolph obviously liked Anthony Knapp more, and there's some players that they didn't like as much, and some guys that the other guy liked more. But there's been one constant, right? And that is Gary Lambert is the top of the tackle board. It was that way for Coach Easton, and it's been that way for Coach Rudolph. Now the question is, can they close it out? So they're certainly trending in the right direction. The confidence pick that I put up last week, it hasn't moved at all for that one, Ryan.
Well, can you imagine if somehow Harvard's able to land a top 100 recruit in Gary Lambert? That'd be fantastic, man. Not for Notre Dame's sake, but like
that would be terrible.
That'd be terrible. It'd be
terrible,
man.
It'd be terrible. Be terrible.
Yes.
Don't even go
for
there.
This channel. It would be terrible, but it would be pretty funny.
It'd be terrible.
Yes, we don't anticipate that happening.
We're moving on because Ryan, it would be terrible. So we're going to go on to something else because Ryan's talking crazy talk today. Yeah. So Ryan, let's go on to the other side of the ball, and obviously a big name that is popular in this channel, speaking of line play, is Justin Scott. Yes. We have been saying on this channel for a very long time, he may commit to Miami. We know he loves Miami. He loves Georgia. But at the end of the day, we feel like that he's going to stay in the North. And now that the visits to the Southern schools have worn off, that's the intel we're hearing, that this is going to be a battle between the Northern schools, with Michigan and Notre Dame being the top two contenders. Ryan, is that pretty much where we stand right now with Justin Scott?
It is. Obviously, there's a big push for Notre Dame to get Justin on campus in July. And I know that's something that they very much want, because Justin's been dropping some hints that a commitment may be coming next month and wants to make the decision. And I mean, because Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but your position all along has been, if he commits this summer and it's to a Southern school, so Miami or Georgia, you still feel good about him landing up north. But if he lands in a different Northern school, might be a little bit of a tougher battle to get Justin. Yes.
Whole lot tougher. Yes. Yeah. And obviously Michigan has done a great job with that recruitment. Sean Davis said on this show months ago that Michigan was out working Notre Dame at the time. We have some intel on where that stands on the board now, but the reality is it's going to be a Notre Dame or Michigan battle. And Ryan, essentially, we've been hearing for months that Justin's going to come visit for this. He's going to visit for this. He's going to, he's now going to come here. And it never happened. And so we now know that Notre Dame is trying to get him again on campus here by the end of the month for another visit here in the end of July. So we don't know if that visit's going to happen. Some of the sources we've talked to have said that he is telling people he's going to make that visit. We'll see if he shows up. But I'll say this, Ryan, and I think this is pretty fair. If Justin Scott doesn't make it onto Notre Dame's campus by the end of July, that is the most telling thing that has ever happened in this recruitment, because Notre Dame is basically all but begging him to get on campus. And if he's unwilling to do so in July, then you have to look at this and say, Notre Dame just isn't where this kid wants to be. If he's willing to visit in July, then I'm going to feel really good about where things stand for Notre Dame. Because once that kid gets face-to-face with Marcus Freeman, it can be very hard for him to say no. Yeah. But if he's unwilling to do that, then we're going to find out where things stand.
That's the biggest thing too, Brian, is, to your point, again, I'm not going to make a prediction, but if Justin Scott, every time Justin Scott is face-to-face with the Notre Dame coaching staff, and specifically Marcus Freeman, you start feeling a lot better about things, right? Like a few months ago when he was about to commit to Notre Dame, that was because of Marcus Freeman's impact, of visiting his school and being able to watch him play basketball. And then obviously with his last visit that he took, you felt, again, very good about where Notre Dame was leaving that visit. It's just the absence is deafening in this one. It really is. And I agree with you. If Justin Scott does not make it back to campus before the decision is made and he ends up at a Northern school, thing's over, in my opinion. I think it's over.
Well, it's not over because they're going to keep trying, but it's going to be a much tougher. It's going to be a much tougher battle to win. There was never a thought in my mind that he would actually sign with a school in the South, ever. I've been very consistent about that.
Same.
The problem was always going to be, okay, but can you beat Michigan? Can you beat Ohio State? That's the question. And that's where Notre Dame is right now.
But to your point, I mean, if he does get to campus though, and even if it's just an unofficial visit, even if it's not an official one, I feel very good about Notre Dame's chances in that regard, because if you're telling me that Marcus Freeman gets the last crack face to face with Justin Scott, I feel pretty good about that situation to be had.
It basically comes down to, Ryan, is Notre Dame has to be willing to play the long game with Justin Scott. The long game gets a lot tougher if he does, in fact, commit to Michigan. That's just the reality of it. So what Notre Dame needs to do is try to get him to slow the process down, which is exactly what they did with him. And this is the thing that can work for Notre Dame, Ryan, is they can say, hey, look, we did this with you when you were thinking of committing to us.
Right.
We said, hey, see the process out. Take the visits. You haven't taken your visit to see us yet. What's the rush? If Michigan wants you, they'll wait. I don't care who else is on the board. If Michigan's trying to tell you, hey, we've got 6 kids committed already, we got 5 kids committed already, we need to know from you, then that says a lot about how they feel about you, right? Because if where we are, I don't care if we had 5, 6, 7, 8 kids committed, if you wanted to come to Notre Dame, we would take you. That needs to be the pitch that Notre Dame is making right now, because Michigan is trying to say, hey, look, this is where you want to be, right? And so we're getting close to numbers, and so they're kind of, putting a little bit of pressure on, saying, hey, you need to be part of this thing. Notre Dame needs to say, hey, doesn't sound like a school that views you in the way that we view you. You know what I mean? And so that's going to have to be the angle Notre Dame takes. Now, the concern that I have, Ryan, is this is happening right when all these coaches are going on vacation. Right. These next 3 weeks are going to make or break, in a lot of instances, Notre Dame's recruitment of Justin Scott. And so does the Notre Dame staff basically say, hey, look, we'll talk to you when you get off vacation, or are they still on their vacation? Right. And that's basically what it's going to come down to at this point in time, Ryan. So who's going to put in the most work, who's going to have the best closing pitch, and whether or not Notre Dame's going to be able to convince them to get on campus. So we're going to find out how it goes. And I know, like I said all but begging, and people say, well, you shouldn't have to do that. Notre Dame shouldn't have to do that. Yeah, that's the same BS that Brian Kelly used to say. Yes, you do. Lou Holtz basically did the same thing with big time players. That's what you do, right? You battle. And so that's kind of where they are. So they're going to have to, they're still playing catch up. That's the reality of it. It just changes from what school that they're at. First it was Georgia, then it was Miami, and now it's Michigan. And we're going to see if they have the ability to pull it off. We're going to find out very, very soon. Because look, Ryan, I really like this DN class. Yeah. But if you don't get Justin Scott, this defensive line class is not good enough. It's just not, because you got 3 ends and 1 interior guy last year. You get 3 ends and 1 interior guy this year. Now you're hoping that some of these ends can grow into 3 techniques, because you missed out on the 6'5", 310-pound 5-star kid that's right down the street, right? And you can't call that success. You can't. Well, I'm sorry. You just can't.
Well, and fans have been very critical of the interior defensive line over the last couple of years, and I completely understand it, right? You need to get bigger. You need to get more impactful on the interior, and I agree. I agree to that. And when you have a 5-star, again, I don't want to keep hitting the same drum, but like, he's 90 minutes away from your campus, right? Like, he's 90 minutes. He's a 5-star. He values education. His mother values education. His mother likes Notre Dame. I mean, there's just like so many things that you look at and say, this is one that you cannot miss on. You can't miss on it, especially if he's going to stay up north. Like, I would have, again, still not forgivable, but I at least would have understood it if he said, I want to go to Georgia. I've been like, okay, he's just looking for something completely different. If he goes to Michigan over Notre Dame, that is just a black eye on the Notre Dame program, an absolute black eye.
From a defensive line recruiting standpoint, yes.
Yes.
So let's move on to that next level right behind him, Kingston Viliama-Asa. He visited Ohio State this weekend. Yep. What's the late that came after he visited Notre Dame, and he also visited USC, which has been his top 3 schools for a while, right? So what's the latest you're hearing with Kingston Viliama-Asa? And I'm saying that now that way. I've been saying Ace in the past. I heard him do an interview where he pronounced his name that way, so I'm trying to get it right. So that's why I've changed how I've pronounced his name, because I was wrong.
It's been a very interesting recruitment for Kingston, because we've known now for several weeks, and even before that, honestly, that USC, Ohio State, and Notre Dame were the teams. And then he obviously follows that up with naming them his top 3 schools. Going on the 3 visits, the last 3 weekends have been USC, Notre Dame, Ohio State in that order. And honestly, Brian, there was a lot of conversation after the USC visit of USC made a big move, right? And I was hesitant to honestly to believe that, because I had thought for a while now that this was a Notre Dame Ohio State conversation. But everything that we're hearing is that it sounds like it's going to come down to Ohio State USC. I'm sorry, Notre
Whoa,
Dame
yeah.
USC. Yeah, flip back there for a second. It's going to come down to Notre Dame USC as the top 2 schools, as he obviously nears decision, which should be over the next few weeks here.
So Ryan, when you look at this one, obviously there is the two differences, right? And Ohio State
Yep.
is certainly did a great job this weekend, and
Yes.
there are some people that have telling me that they're hearing Ohio State feels good. I just haven't heard that from many of my sources on all various sides. I haven't heard anyone except Ohio State people say that they think that they have an equal shot at getting him.
Sure.
So I've heard Notre Dame, Ohio State. I've heard Notre Dame, USC. The one constant is Notre Dame. Right now, Ryan, there's 2 different polls with Kingston and that are going to influence the decision. So let's talk a little bit about those and where you think things are trending. Because I know right now, Ryan, I know my confidence level has that I put out last week based on the intel we had has fallen a little bit based on our latest intel. So let's talk about that pool and what are the factors that are going to Kingston making a decision to stay close to home or go away?
Well, obviously, St. John Bosco, prominent California program, national championships this past season, 13-1, epic game against Mater Dei in the playoffs. That was one of the best games last season. So, I mean, basically the pool is, Brian, to your point, is that one, on Notre Dame's side, it's the spirituality, it's the comforts, and it's also, I think he has all the blessings from his immediate family of they love Notre Dame. I think that all those things are very much true. And I think he could see himself being a part of that program from a football perspective, from a after football perspective, from a spirituality perspective. I really think that Kingston loves Notre Dame. The other side to the coin, though, is that he's a California kid that grew up with USC football. And I think that there's a lot of pull around him, not necessarily from his immediate family, to stay at home. California kid, stay at home and help Lincoln Riley and the Trojans build it back. And obviously they took positive signs in year 1. We just saw his fellow cornerback on St. John Bosco, Marcellus Williams, who just committed to USC. I know he was just on an official visit this past weekend, or a couple weekends ago, with Marcellus, with Peyton Woodyard, with a couple of the St. John Bosco guys. So I really think this is coming down to two very different avenues. One is be the California kid who stays in state at USC and helps bring them back and be the homegrown kid. The other side is to blaze your own trail, go to Notre Dame, and be different, right? The difference, I think, is the biggest thing there. So 2 very different vantage points, 2 very different missions. And I think that it's what's going to make this one so fascinating down the stretch is that it is completely different pitches to him as far as what he can accomplish at each one of these schools. I think Kingston will be a great fit no matter where he chooses. I really do. But ultimately, Notre Dame has done about as much as in the immediacy as far as the official visit and everything to really make him and his family feel very good about their fit with the University of Notre Dame. It's just about the pool of his hometown, his home state, his familiarity with the school.
This has a really kind of unique Manti Te'o vibe to it, and not because they're both Polynesian kids, but just sort of the kid of great faith that has everyone pulling him to one direction, but this little small circle to the other one. And and USC put on the full. I mean, they put on the full court press with him, man. I mean, they have put on the full court press, and they've done a good job. And I think Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden, I will give a lot of credit to in this recruitment. Al Washington to a degree, but this is one of those ones, Ryan, where I would feel a lot better about where this thing stood if they had someone other than Al Golden coaching linebackers. I'm just going to flat out come out and say, and I said we weren't going to really dive into this type of thing on the show, but I'll just leave it at that. I think that if they had a better situation there, I think this one would be a done deal. Now the question is, can they close? And it's going to be a back and forth. And the reason I use Manti is because I feel like Manti was constantly back and forth It's USC, Notre Dame, USC, Notre Dame. Went to bed thinking USC, woke up thinking Notre Dame. And that's more of the correlation I'm referring to with Kingston. It's the West Coast kid that's having that back and forth pull of the two. We're just going to figure out what he wakes up thinking the day that he's going to make his decision. And I think it could very well come down to that. And that's why it's imperative that the Notre Dame staff really just really keep on him and stay consistent with the contact and could stay consistent with the messaging, because this is a very important player to the class. There's no question about it.
He's tremendously important. Obviously, he's one of the biggest official visitors they've had all month, to be able to sign a player like this, to really give you the floor in a linebacker class that has decent ceilings to it, actually really nice ceilings to it, but it doesn't have that stay power, that known commodity. And that's what Kingston Viliamo-Asa is. He's a guy that is going to be a good football player, right? You know that he is going to be a proven commodity on the next level. And honestly, Brian, I hate giving credit to USC, but I will for a second. I mean, coming into these official visits this month, I thought USC was the clear third. Like clear.
Everyone said that. Every source I had said the same exact thing, Ryan.
Yeah. And that's from just talking with Kingston and just kind of hearing his remarks about the three schools. I'm just like, USC is the clear third. And their visit a few weeks ago, give them credit, man. They not only cut the gap, they made this one about as close a race as you can possibly see it, and one where they could end up winning it. Like, that's where you are with USC. So Notre Dame has the battle over the next few weeks. I will say this, is that I do think that Notre Dame, if they remain consistent over the next few weeks, will still have a chance here. We'll still have a good chance here, because we've talked about this in the past. Kingston's not one of those kids that's a shallow person, right? Like, oh, what are they going to give me? What's the flash? He's going to talk about everything with his parents. He's going to talk about everything with his support system, with his coaches. What's going to be the best decision for Kingston at the end of the day? So I think that does bode well for Notre Dame. It's just about being consistent down the stretch here.
And that's why deep down I still feel better about this. My confidence level has gone down, but I still feel good about it, because I feel like at the end of the day, Kingston's one of those kids that's going to sit down and say, okay, I know I'm getting the pressure here. I know this is being on, but I need to figure out what's best for me in my future. And it could end up still being USC, but I still feel good about that one, right?
Right.
And so when you look at his recruitment, as you said, Ryan, this isn't somebody's in the chest or like, so they're not going to get Kingston and Justin Scott. Definitely didn't say that. So you can take that noise somewhere else. But they're going to have to close, and the longer he goes in making this decision, the longer it takes for him to actually make a decision, I feel the better it'll be for Notre Dame, because I do think USC did a good job of kind of waiting, just kind of hanging around at the end, and then just throwing everything at him during the visit and since. I mean, they brought up
Troy Polamalu and everything. Yeah, exactly.
They're putting all the pressure on him. And so if you're Notre Dame, you're just sit back and relax. No need to make a decision. Just chill. You don't have to do this. Just relax. Because the longer this goes on and he starts thinking about all the things that went into why Notre Dame was in the great position that it was for a long time, I think that's going to help Notre Dame a ton. And look, all three schools, for the most part, have done a great job recruiting him. Ohio State's done a great job recruiting him. USC has done a really good job there. Marcus Freeman, Chad Bowden, now Washington have done a really good job with this recruitment as well. So we're going to see who can close it in the end, because it doesn't matter where you were leading up to it. It doesn't matter that USC trailed the entire time. If they get them, right? It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So let's talk about where else is Notre Dame right now at linebacker, Ryan? And obviously you've got Kingston on the board, and there's really only one linebacker left on the board, and that would be Bradley Shaw, who is still, as we said last week, a guy that Notre Dame has some interest in. The question is, Ryan, is will they be able to actually convince him to leave the state of Alabama and come to Notre Dame? I think I hear all these positive things about where they are, but it's kind of like with Deuce Knight in the 25 class. I think he loves Notre Dame. I think he says all the right things. I think genuinely he has affection, but leaving Mississippi to go up to South Bend, Indiana is not an easy thing. Same with Bradley Shaw, leaving Hoover, Alabama to come up to South Bend, Indiana. It's a whole different deal. Where do things stand, Ryan, from what we've heard with Bradley Shaw, who's a tough kid to get in contact with, by the way? So we're having to rely on a lot of sources when it comes to this one.
Yes, sources pretty close to him, but regardless, yes, it's not the easiest recruitment in the world. But I'll say this, Brian, about Bradley. Obviously, Hoover, Alabama. top 3 schools coming out of the Notre Dame visits, and I still feel pretty solidly about that after a pretty recent conversation, is Auburn, Notre Dame, and Georgia. Those are the 3 schools that I think are really standing out for Bradley. I'll say this, I think it is very telling that Bradley has been to Notre Dame twice over the last couple of months, including an official visit, obviously. So there is heavy interest there. It comes from a really good family, academically oriented. I know his dad is a football coach on the staff as well as an educator. So I believe that education is a high priority for the Shaw family, which is good, always for Notre Dame. Anytime academics are a priority, it matters very much. And I think that for me, this one it's going to be a tough pull still, but it's one that I think Notre Dame can make happen. I really do. So I still think that they're in the top 3 for Bradley. I think it's going to be more about, obviously, things are going to heat up quickly if you don't get Kingston, right? If you don't get Kingston, then you have to pivot quickly, and you really need to be able to close this one with Bradley. But I think Notre Dame has a chance. It's just about how things unravel down the stretch here, because I think that he is a academically oriented kid. I think he is a smart kid. I think he comes from a very good family. All those things do bode well to end up at Notre Dame. It's just about closing time and making him feel that Notre Dame coming to South Bend is more important than staying and playing at Auburn, his home state school.
Right. Now, Ryan, I talked about this late last week. I'm not sure if you were on the show for this one or not, but I was actually told by some sources a week ago, when there was a lot of optimism about Kingston, that if Bradley Shaw wanted to commit, they would not say no before Kingston. Now, I don't know if they would take him after Kingston, because 3 is the number, but Kingston's one of those, we'll take you no matter what kids, right? Sure. So, I mean, Gilby Lambert's that guy. We've been saying that for months. Justin Scott's that guy. If Notre Dame went out and got, tomorrow the second best 3 technique in the country, and Justin Scott decides in 2 months he wants to come to Notre Dame, they're taking Justin Scott, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. Kingston's one of those guys that we've talked about being one of those guys. Caleb Beasley is one of those guys. So there are guys in the class that have been that, and Kingston is that guy. So, but they really like Bradley Shaw a lot. So this isn't. I want to make sure that we're clear. This isn't a consolation prize. They would take him before. It's just not. They're just not going to take him after, because that gets them a little bit over their numbers. But they'd be more comfortable getting to 4. And I know it doesn't make sense, because you're still going to get to 4, but you can't pass this kid up if you're not going to get this other kid. But if that other kid decides he wants to come, you still take that other kid. That's basically just kind of how it works. And then you kind of figure it out at some other places. But we talked about that last week. So even before my confidence in him dipped, I was told that if Bradley Shaw called up Notre Dame tomorrow and said, I want to come, my understanding is that they would take him. That's how much they like him. And so my hope is, and I still haven't gotten word on this, I've been still trying to find out what his measurements were when he was on campus. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to matter to me. Because as we've said before, Ryan, the film was great. He comes from the kind of family that it's tough coming from the South up to South Bend, socially, culturally, academically. But everything that we've heard about the family is he has the exact kind of support system at home that you need to thrive in this sort of situation, which is partly also another reason why Notre Dame likes this kid a lot. But the film is great. It's just, what's the size? I reiterate it every time we talk about this kid. That's the only question that I have about this young man right now.
Yeah, well, and I think that it's obviously a very great sign, and we've talked about this before, that offer lists matter a whole lot more than recruiting rankings do. But I just mentioned one of his finalists is Georgia, and hi, puppy. Georgia is a school. Yes, it's Rita. Georgia obviously is a school that is very high on Bradley Shaw, a school that would take Bradley Shaw, and obviously the offer list is very good. And this isn't like oh man, they might end up with Bradley Shaw. It's like, this kid's rated as a top 150 recruit by several different platforms. Like, he's a pretty dang good player, man. Like, he's a good football player. So yeah, we'll see obviously as it ends up, and how the numbers shake out, and what the fit makes sense if it happens before or after, and all those great things. But Notre Dame has put themselves in a pretty solid spot with the Hoover, Alabama kid, which doesn't happen very often. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it ends up in the end. But I think they're in a solid spot as of today.
So last couple, Ryan, Carter Nelson. So this recruitment has taken a hard 180 over the last few days.
It has, man. It's been wild. I mean, basically coming out of the Notre Dame visit, felt so good talking to sources, and I know that you had heard obviously some similar stuff of like Notre Dame made a big move. Notre Dame feels pretty good about where they are with Carter Nelson, and Georgia was another school that was felt very good about Carter Nelson. And I was being told that there was a big pull to Carter of like, hey man, you don't have to stay in the state of Nebraska. Go out, spread your wings, make the best decision for you. So Notre Dame and Georgia coming into this past weekend were who I have said are the leaders. And I believe that very because there's very good sourcing, obviously, on that end, right?
Every
But
sourcing
yes,
on that said the same
every
exact thing.
sourcing.
Every
Yes,
Georgia source, every Notre Dame
yes,
source, every Carter Nelson source. That's
yes.
exactly what the story was. But it changed a
And
little bit this weekend, Ryan.
it did change, and obviously it changed leading up a little bit to this weekend because his final official visit was to the University of Nebraska, his home state school. Cornhuskers. Obviously, there's a. I want to phrase this very well because I don't want this to sound like this is a parent thing. The parents were very open to him going wherever he wanted to go. Very open. Make the best decision for you. That's the vibe that I completely got all the way through this recruitment. But I do think that there was a lot of pull from people around him, friends, peers, that type of thing, to stay in the States. And he has a couple friends that are committed in the 2024 class to the University of Nebraska. He has other friends that are going to be going to the University of Nebraska just as students. So I think that there was a mission to be a trailblazer until recently. But I think this weekend especially was one where the pull from so many people around you was enough to change your angle a little bit and call it a little bit of cold feet, just a little bit, right? It was a wanting to blaze your own path, and then it was not wanting to maybe settle to be the home state guy, staying in state for play for Nebraska. But unfortunately for Notre Dame, the pull from people around him was such that they convinced him this weekend that basically that's where this thing is trending, right? To stay in the States, go to the University of Nebraska and be a part of the solution and help Matt Rule get that program back to prominence because Nebraska has been a great program, obviously, in the past, and they want to get back to there. So coming into the weekend, if it was a Notre Dame-Georgia battle, you could convince me either one was leading at any point in that one leading up. Nebraska obviously did everything that they had to do over the last week or so, even a couple days before this visit, to put this one in their favor now going down the stretch with Carter Nelson.
We've heard a lot, Ryan, about Davis Andrews, and I'll just give a couple brief updates on this before we move on to the mailbag. So that's pretty much wraps up the other stuff. We're waiting to hear back from how the visit went with Davis Andrews to BYU this weekend. He took an official to BYU. As we've mentioned, the expectation is still that he's going to be a 26 recruit, and Notre Dame still wants him. I think BYU right now is the main competitor because of the fact it's a Mormon school, and they have a much deeper track record, obviously, of success with kids who go on missions and then come back. So Notre Dame going into the weekend, I think, was in a great place. We got to find out where it was coming out. So that's why we're not going to dive too much into him because we are still waiting to hear some intel. I do still also anticipate Caleb Beasley still talking to Notre Dame. That's the intel that I've gotten, is that the communication is still there, even after the Tennessee visit, that there's still conversations happening between Caleb Beasley and Notre Dame. But we'll see how that one progresses. That's really not going to be a lot to talk about on that one until we get to the Ohio State weekend and we find out whether he's going to show up or not. So we won't be talking a ton about him moving forward until that date. But all I'll say is he's from everything I've heard, the conversations are still happening and the communication is still there, and that's all you can ask for. So, Ryan, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. And, of course, next week we're going to start diving into the 2025 board, which right now Notre Dame has 2 commits in the class. We think there's a chance they could maybe get another 1 or 2 here this offseason. We'll see how things go. But Notre Dame has been putting in a lot of work on the 2025 class. So we're going to break that into a few shows here in the month of July. Most of our month of July is going to be our recruiting hour show is going to be built around really introducing you to the 2025 class and the things that we've heard as we kind of get into the season. So we'll have a lot on that and break down some film, talk about where they stand, what the Notre Dame needs are in the 25 class. Cause we got Notre Dame's got 21 commits right now, I believe. Right, Ryan? So, we kind of know what the needs are for 25 for the most part. Obviously there'll be some roster attrition and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be very, very interesting. But so that's where they are there. But before we get to that mailbag, folks, and if you have mailbag questions, go ahead and throw those in there now, and we will get to those. And we're gonna obviously have a lot of team stuff coming up because we're now about a month away, maybe a little bit less actually, from Notre Dame being at the start of fall camp. We're actually about, I think I can't remember what I was told, Ryan, 25th or 26th, 24th or 25th is around somewhere around there for report date. I'm not quite sure when that's going to be, but Notre Dame's going to start in late July because of the fact their season starts in late August. So, man, it's going to be on us before we know it, man. And I'm excited about it. So we'll have plenty to talk about when it comes to that. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. We do have some further intel on these recruitments on our message board, and as we get more, we'll obviously put it on there. So you'll want to sign up for that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can sign up for a monthly membership at $4.99 a month, an annual membership at $49.99 for the year, or if you want to support us beyond just the normal rate, you can also join the IB Booster Club. And if you join that, you get some free merch as part of that as well. So we greatly appreciate that. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And then we're in the process, we should have it by the end of the week, of having another option for people that just want to just donate some money. We've actually literally had people ask, hey, how can we just give you guys some money? And I was like, well, I don't really do PayPal anymore. So here, we'll try and figure it out. We got some different ways. So we are working on that. We'll see if that works for you all again, but we appreciate all the support you give. We really do, whether it's with your money or with your time. They're both very, very valuable and very much appreciated. So thank you for that. And thank you for all your continued support of the Irish Breakdown podcast. So Ryan, let's jump into the mailbag. And
Yes,
we have a few super chats, a lot to discuss here. And I think Jordan Schreiber has overtaken John A1 as the primary question asker. So I think about half of the questions right now are from Jordan, so we'll get to plenty of those. But start off with a super chat from Rob Osgood. He says, hey guys, thank you, Rob, very much. Hey guys, just a comment. I love this 24 class. You win some and you lose some, but I honestly believe Marcus Freeman will fight, and that's all I can ask for. Thanks. I mean, Ryan, I think this is a big thing because I said this in a conversation the other day, and I think I said this on a show last week. What frustrates me is that too many people seem to focus on the couple areas that are negatives, and they are. I mean, if you lose Kingston, that's not a good thing. The safety class
right.
is better than people are giving it credit for, but not good enough, in my opinion, on the big picture. And they focus on those things and completely ignore that Notre Dame is literally Gearby Lambert committing away from having their best offensive class in probably over 20 years.
Yep.
I mean, literally, that's exactly what they're on the verge of. And you don't talk about it because of the obsession that people have with being negative. And my only pushback is to say, hey, look, I'm not saying don't talk about the things that got to get better. We need to talk about Al Golden's got to get better. We got to talk about Chris O'Leary's got to get better. We got to talk about how Al Washington's got to get better. But let's not act like this is the same old, same old. There's some really exciting things happening with this football program right now. And if they're able to close on a couple kids, right? I mean, you can't be 2 kids away, 3 kids away from having your best class in 20 years and things are bad. If they get Gearby Lambert, Justin Scott, and Kingston Mesa, this is the best Notre Dame class in over 20 years, in my opinion. And I don't know that it's really arguable because there's no weakness on this board. If your weakness is a safety class with Bronte Johnson and Kennedy Urlacher, you're doing pretty flipping good. I mean, if that's your worst position in a class, does it need to get better? Yeah, it does. It needs to get better. But I think that's the thing that people miss on, Ryan. This is a tremendous offensive class, and it's a Gearby Lambert pickup away from literally being a generational class for Notre Dame. Because to me, a generation is what, 10, 15, 20 years, right? At the most. Yeah. Without question, the best offensive class. When you look at quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and offensive line, best offensive class they've had in at least 20 years. And the only one that can contend with it is the 2008 class. And the reason I give this group the edge over the 2018 class primarily comes down to the depth at the positions. So there's no Michael Floyd in this class, but to me, the next 2 are better than the next 2 in that class. You're not as good at tight end, but your offensive line class is better, in my opinion. Yeah. Your quarterback is more of a higher floor. It doesn't have the ceiling of Dan Chris, but the floor is higher. It's a better running back class. So to me, the only one that can even contend with it is that 08 class that had Dan Chris, Jonas Gray, Michael Floyd, Kyle Rudolph, Deion Walker, Joseph Fourier, Trevor Robinson, Braxton Cave. I mean, that's what that class has. And this group has a chance to be as good, if not better than that, if they get Gilby Lambert. That's something to be excited about, Ryan. And it doesn't mean we ignore the other stuff. But if you're spending more time focused on those things than you are how good this is, you got to rethink some things a little bit on this one.
Well, and I think Rob hit on a great point of the fight in Marcus Freeman as far as the recruiting side of things. I really think, Rob, I mean, especially because, I mean, you think about two kids that we've talked about in the first segment here. We talk about Kingston Viliamo Asa, talk about Bradley Shaw, right? One's out of St. John Bosco, a school that Notre Dame has had almost no success in historically, like no success in St. John Bosco, especially recently. And you talk about a kid out of Hoover, Alabama, that you've put yourself in a decent position with, obviously. I think that is a testament to doesn't care as far as like what the preconceived notion is of where a kid should go to school and where a kid should stay. And I think that also if they miss out on Justin Scott and Kingston this summer, is there any doubt that Notre Dame's going to keep recruiting those kids and keep putting their best foot forward and keep grinding on that? I mean,
better not.
Caleb Beasley committed to Tennessee a couple months ago now at this point. It's like they're not stop recruiting that kid. You know why? Because they're going to put the effort in. And are you going to win every battle? No. But I know that you're not going to win every battle because there's no effort. Talking about Marcus Freeman, I just know that that's not going to be a thing. So, yes, I think that Marcus Freeman is a grinder on the recruiting trail. I think he is a guy that is not going to back down from any fights. I don't think he's going to back off of Southern kids because they're assumed to be SEC leans. I don't think that stuff is true. I don't think that he's going to stop going into the state of Texas because if Texas starts getting better, it's just like, oh, Texas is back. I can't get Texas kids anymore. No, that's not how that works, right? That's not how that works. So I do think Marcus Freeman at the core, at the top, is an absolute grinder as a recruiter. He's not going to back down from any of these fights. And I think that's very important.
The key is going to be he's got to make sure he surrounds himself with coaches who are the exact same way. And we've said it before, and we'll say it again. That's going to be what determines how good Marcus Freeman is as a coach,
right?
Is the accountability. And how do you fix it? Whether that's hiring new coaches or doing what it needs to take to make sure the ones that you have start getting the job done, right? I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to. We'll see if he's able to do that because that's going to be key. We have a super chat also from Tom Connor. Tom Connor says, what are your thoughts on Dre Brown and his contribution to recruiting? Ryan, I'll let you kind of speak to what you've heard from recruits, but everything I hear from people around the program is that he's held in very high regard, which is why he's been at Notre Dame as long as he has, because he's valued. He's a guy that they view as, potential maybe guy that could get into coaching. He's a former Division I running back. But I know when I've talked to my sources around the program, you'll hear Dre's name come up quite a bit as a guy that they believe is an integral part of putting these classes together. Would I say that he has the same role as Chad Bowden? No, because he doesn't have the same job as Chad Bowden. But for what he's asked to do, I hear a lot of really good things about what he brings to the table for the program. And that's why they've kept him around and value him and make sure that they can do what they got to do to keep him here so far up to this point.
Well, and I think that obviously we talk about Chad a lot because he's kind of the symbol of the recruiting side of things. But there are some grinders on the recruiting side, like Caleb Davis is another guy that really does a tremendous job on the recruiting side. Dre is a guy that does a tremendous job. The biggest thing that I could say is that the word authentic has always been thrown around when recruits have dealt with Dre Brown consistently. And he's a guy that they talk to a ton. Guys that they really value, obviously, and a relationship guy. And I know he brings a great energy to the table. So this is probably a little bit of my fault, right? I should mention the support staff on the recruiting side a little bit more than I do, not just kind of just Chad, right? Like Caleb Davis and several others, obviously on top of Dre, they've really put the work into, and it's not a one-man operation, obviously.
And look, that's not to take away from the job that Chad does. Chad does a phenomenal job. We've said this before. You won't hear the only name you'll hear as frequently as Marcus Freeman's with recruits is Chad Bowden. But from talking to sources, Chad also relies on those guys. And here's where I will say this. There's some parts of what Dre does. I'm not quite sure what he does, but one thing that is sure, you see him every year, Ryan, in the spring heavily involved with the next year's class.
Yes.
So, like, you saw his name a lot with 25 kids back in February, March, April, May. Now that they're transitioning the 25 class as a staff, you'll then start hearing Dre's name more and more and more with the 26 kids. And it's important to have that, because if you don't have someone that can work ahead, it's like we talked about with advanced scouting last week with the new guy that they hired from we think they're going to hire from West Virginia. Ryan, you know this in scouting and coaching. If you don't have a really good advanced staff situation, you're going to be in trouble. And it's the same thing in recruiting. If you have a guy that can go ahead and get an early start and help us really get our foot in the door and build that love and build that relationship, then when we bring in the other coaches and the position coaches and Chad and Coach Freeman, you've already put us in great footing. If you have a guy like that in your back office, that's an incredible asset. And that is something that I do know for sure that we've seen Dre Brown involved in, and it's a huge plus, and it's partly why I think Notre Dame is in such a good. I mean, him and Chad Bowden are two big reasons why Notre Dame is in a pretty good position right now with the early 2025 class at this point.
Okay. Well, and again, like talking about Caleb Davis is another guy back there, Brian. It's like you remember when Brandon Hillman was first offered by Notre Dame, and everyone was like, "Who's Brandon Hillman? Where'd this guy come from?" They just found him, and it's just like, no, I know for a fact that Caleb Davis had been talking to him for several weeks, probably months before that he was even offered. So some of those guys obviously don't get the notoriety. They don't get their name pumped out there as much. Dre included, obviously, in that situation. But these guys are vital, and this staff is vital to putting in that groundwork early on, to your point. So I think that's a wonderful note, is that a lot of these future kids that you're going to learn their names about very quickly here at some points, the staff's been working on them for weeks and months, and it's been a long process, obviously. So Chad is incredible at what he does, but again, I'm sure that he will even give a lot of credit to the people around him, because you're only as good as the people that you work with.
Absolutely. Another super chat from Lou Holtz, Thunder and Bolts. It's a great name. It says, on Justin Scott, is it true that Coach Elston is out working at Coach Washington? If so, what plausible explanation is there for this? Seems inexcusable if true. Lou, we're not going to address that on this show. If you're a member of the message board, read the message board. We discuss it there, but that's not really something that I'm going to get into in this show. But I did want to read it, and thank you for your super chat. But that's just not the kind of thing that we're going to discuss in today's show. We get into that a little bit more on the message board.
And we may talk about it obviously in the deep future, but hopefully not. Hopefully
when it's all said and done, when it's all said and done, we'll have some conversations about that. But for right now, we're going to leave that on the message board. Here's a team question, Ryan, and this is from Jordan Schreiber. Which sophomore linebacker do you believe gets the most snaps this year?
It's a tough call between Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Sneed for me. I think I'm going to go with Jalen, just because I think that athleticism is just so enticing, man. Like, I just really think that there's going to be some situations where you look at Jack Kaiser, you say, I could fit you inside and now get even more athletic at the rover position and get him on the field a little bit more. So I'm going to go with Jalen Sneed. But Nolan Ziegler is a guy where it's like, if you pick him, I'll be like, yep, I get that. That makes total sense. I hope both of them play a lot, though.
I think the reason I would probably lean towards Jalen right now is twofold. Number one is I still don't have a lot. I'm going to have something coming out tomorrow about comments that Coach Freeman said about playing younger guys. But I've been hearing this for a long, and this is no shot at Coach Freeman because I believe he means it. But I'm just in sort of I'm going to see it I'm going to believe it when I see it kind of mode. But he's emphasized we need to play these younger players, and I've told my coaches, get it done. We're going to have a plan to get it done. I'll have that in an article tomorrow. I have the other part of the article. So it's part 2 came out today, Ryan, and it was basically him and I talking about why he thinks the defense in 2023 is going to make a big jump. But the reason I'm going to go with Jalen now is because I don't have a lot of faith that Al Golden is going to actually have the kind of rotation that you need to have inside, to where Nolan's going to get the Greer Martini or Tavon Coney snaps when they were sort of that number 3 guy. So then it comes down to who has the niche role. And I'll be shocked if Jalen Sneed's not on their third down nickel package. Shocked if he's not on that. And so that's where I'm going right now. My hope is that those guys are both rotation players. And if that's the case, if Nolan's sort of that next key reserve and they actually play the younger guys like they're supposed to, that's when I think Nolan Ziegler gets a lot more snaps as sort of that number 3 linebacker that can play both Mike and Will. So it's more about a lack of faith in coaches doing that than it is about the other aspect of it. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one, Brian.
I agree.
Brent Smith says, do you believe the majority of our 3 stars in the 24 class will earn a 4th star during their senior year? And if so, which players?
So as of right now, I mean, Brent, it's tough, right? Because I guess my mind's more going to like the consensus 3 stars, right? That guys are considered it like, when we average it out of all the different platforms. Because I mean, there's even a couple platforms that have like, I think there's one that has Isaiah Canyon is still as a 3-star, but the majority have 4 stars. And there's a couple of those.
It's kind of absurd. On 3 has Isaiah Canyon as a top 100 player, right?
Yes.
So for all the people that think On 3 has a Notre Dame bias, I don't think they have a Notre Dame bias. I just think they have some jacked up rankings.
Yeah.
They have him as the number 95 player in the country. Rivals has him as a 5.6 3-star, which means he's not even the highest category of 3 stars. And 247 Sports thinks he's the 47th best player in the state of Georgia. So look, Ryan, here's the deal. I don't care about the stars. I care about what we rank. And what we rank, the 2 guys that I think have the best shot at getting up to 4-star players as seniors for me, because I believe 4 of the 11 commits are either 3.5 or 3-star players is where I'm at for the Notre Dame defensive class. And that would be actually it's 6 of them, excuse me. And so I have Bryce Young as a 3.5 star. I fully expect him to jump into that 4-star range.
Yes.
Now, keep in mind, part of that is because we remove the upside grade. If the upside grade was included, some of these guys would be 4 stars. So if I was doing a ranking like Rivals does or 247 or On 3, I would include the upside grade and he'd be a 4-star. But for the way we do it, he's a 3.5 star right now. I just need to see a little bit more production and improved technique, and I need to see him show the same athleticism with the bigger body. That's really what my holdup is right now. But the tools are impressive. I fully expect him to make that jump. I fully expect Kennedy Urlacher to make that jump. I actually had Kennedy as a 4-star early, but when I tweaked my grading system, he fell right below it. So that's why he dropped to a 3.5. Not that I've seen new film that he wasn't as impressive. I just tweaked my grading system, and he was one of the guys that just fell a touch below. Teddy Rezak's a touch below. I just need to see that Teddy can add a little bit more weight this season and play, but he's a heck of a football player. So those are guys right now, Ryan. I would need to see a ton from Tabron, Benny Powell, and Sean Sevillano for them to be 4 stars. The guy that I'm most curious about this year, Ryan, and this is the one I want to kick to you. Carson Hobbs is a consensus 3-star recruit. He's one of those guys that some of the people that I talk to at Notre Dame will bring him up. Others, we talk about other things, but there are some at Notre Dame. They're just sold on this kid, right? And so I'm very curious to see. I know he's had some really good track times this spring, and I'm really curious to see how he does as a senior, because that was one of my biggest things, Ryan, is I just didn't see a lot of speed and the fluidity you want. He's a really good high school football player, for that high school, but I just don't see the elite tools. He's one that I'm very curious about, because if I were to say now, I'd say he's a ways away from being a 4-star on my grading scale. But there's some things you like that if the athleticism takes a tick up, you could see him making that climb. What are your thoughts on all of those, Ryan, especially the one on Carson?
Well, Carson was actually what I was going to bring up anyway, as far as one of the couple consensus 3-star guys that maybe could make that big jump. Because again, you mentioned it already. The biggest thing for me is that he was a part of the top 4x100 relay team in the state of Ohio, a pretty good state, obviously, for producing some athletes. So I think Carson has a chance to take a huge step, because the one thing that I know is that technically I think he's going to be pretty good, right? Because he already is pretty good, and I think he has a good feel for the game. If his game matures from an athleticism perspective, I think he has a chance to make a major rise. I agree with you there. And I think that he is a confident kid, and I love confident corners. Those are guys that usually end up being very good.
And it's not a false confidence either, Ryan.
No.
Because it's not braggadocious. It's not like the guys that are like me. I view them sometimes as like there's a lot of, you're like convincing yourself that you're good.
Right.
That's with Carson. Sometimes, Ryan, you can just get a sense of how confident he is without him out even speaking. It's just the way he carries himself. And
Yes.
to me, that's really like, that's a genuine thing. He really, like Jaden Mickey's that way.
Yeah.
Jaden's just that way. I mean, that's why he's been able to be so strong during this situation where his mother's battling cancer, because that's just the young man they raised. They raised him to be intelligent and confident and those type of things, and he was raised in a way where he's had to grow up fast, and so it's a genuine thing. So when he gets burned, his confidence doesn't sink because it's not of emotion. It's just who he is. And that's what Deion Sanders. I know he drives some people nuts, and I get it. Trust me, there's some things he does, but that's who he is. That's not an act, folks. That's who Deion is, right? Like, he's being his genuine self, and I know that we don't like it, but it's
Love it or
partly
hate
why
it.
he was such a
That's
great player who was also able to play two sports at the professional
Yes.
level, right? And Carson just has just a natural confidence about himself, but he does it in a way where it doesn't rub you the wrong way like it does with the way Deion was as a player or some other guys like that. It's just like this is just a really friendly, happy kid that's really confident in himself. And so I'm very curious to see what he does this season.
Was anybody shocked, Brian, that him and Jaden Mickey absolutely hit it off on his official visit weekend? Was there any shock?
No.
It's like, wow, Carson Downs and
No.
Jaden Mickey get along.
No.
Like, oh,
You know
cool.
what's funny? It was either going to be one or the other. They were either going to love each other or hate each other
Because
they're so similar.
Yeah.
But Carson strikes me as the kind of kid that'd be hard to hate, to be honest
Yes.
with you. And I'm not just saying that because he does Carson's Corner. I mean, part of the reason he does Carson's Corner is because
He's a
of
good
that
kid.
engaging personality. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, he's a very good kid. Another kid that I think is going to take a rise potentially, Brian, is Bodie Cahoon, as far as kids that are considered consensus 3 stars by these rankings.
Well, is he a consensus 3-star?
I'm pretty sure he still is. Yeah,
because I know that Rivals has him as a 4-star.
Do they?
Yeah, they've had him as a 4-star for a while. Yeah, they're the only ones. Everybody else has him as a 3-star. So he is on the consensus list a 3-star.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So the composite at 247 and the consensus at On 3 both have him as a 3-star. But if you mean that consensus, you are correct. But if you mean consensus isn't like everyone has him as a 3-star, Rivals has him as a 4-star.
Yeah,
but it doesn't change the
averaging
point.
out.
Right.
Yeah. Because I think that him, I mean, 6'2", 220, going to be 220 plus pounds probably this season. 4.54 in the 40 electric times. Obviously, he's a very talented athlete. And I think that the greatest note I ever got on him is that he's only been playing linebacker for half a season out of necessity. He was a safety, obviously. So I think a full year of playing linebacker, a full offseason of playing linebacker, him growing into his body. It wasn't too long ago that he was a 5'11", 185-pound kid, and now he's 6'2", 220. And now that I think also, Brian, that he has his focus on playing football the next level, there's obviously going to be an attention to detail that comes with that, right? There's going to be an urge to want to be even better in that avenue. So I think he's a kid that is growing into his body. He's growing into a position that is still very foreign to him. I think that he takes a big step as a senior and he breaks out.
Yeah. Now, there are some other guys that other people have as 3-stars that I don't. So, but again, Ryan, I care less and less and less every day about what other people rank recruits. I do. And I know that you all care. Some of you obsess over, I get it.
Yeah.
But I would encourage you to at least look at our rankings before you ask us questions and see where we have a guy, and that'll kind of answer your question. So if the industry is, because part of the thing is, Ryan, I just don't think the industry is what it was when I got into it, to be honest with you, which is there was a genuine, I want to get it right. Even when they're wrong, I want to get it right. So when we miss, it comes from a place of, I just missed. I didn't have any bias like towards the kid, or there wasn't anything about clickbait, or, I mean, look, if it was that way, we'd have Carson Hobbs ranked as the number 2 kid in the class. You know what I mean? So I just think there's less of that. It's become more about clickbait and driving eyes and things like that. So for example, Ryan, what's the motivation to move Cole Mullins up the rankings right now?
Nothing now.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But I'll say this till the day I die. There is no, like, sometimes, Ryan, you can look at a kid and say, I get why people don't. Like Bodie Cahoon, I have him as a 4-star. I do. I get why people don't. I've never said, man, these guys are nuts for having Bodie as a 3-star. I get it. I've seen other players like that. I don't know how in the world that people can look at Cole Mullins and say 3-star. I just don't get it. So that's one that I will never understand ever. Size, athleticism, production, plays in a big time area. There's nothing. So what are they going to wake up to this year? That's my whole point. So if they didn't think he was good the last 2 years while playing middle linebacker at 6'4", 240 pounds for one of the best high schools in the South, what's going to make them change their mind? And some of you care about that. I don't.
Only if some SEC schools try to flip him, like if
Pretty
Georgia
much.
throws their hat into the ring
Pretty
or
much.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened with Isaiah Canyon. I mean, all of a sudden Georgia, starts talking to him, and Florida State offers, and all of a sudden out of nowhere he's a top 100 player.
The film didn't change. Right.
Exactly.
Film didn't change on Canyon.
Exactly.
Isn't it funny, Brian? You remember when Notre Dame was starting to recruit Isaiah Canyon, and he was a very low-ranked recruit, and he didn't have a ton of offers yet, and everyone was so upset about it. And then they land him, and his ranking starts going up, and now everyone doesn't say a word about Isaiah Canyon anymore.
Yeah.
It's just kind of funny.
We had him ranked very high all along, so we've been high on that young man for a very long time. But that would be my thoughts on offense. I think the only guy that I have ranked as a non-4-star on offense, Ryan, I believe is
Anthony Knapp.
Anthony Knapp, yeah. I believe I have all the other. I'm going to pull up my rankings for the offensive class right now. Actually, just give me a second.
Yeah, I think that would have to be correct.
I believe he's the only one that I don't have as a 4-star right now.
Do you have Prescott as a 4-star?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I think so then.
I have Styles as a top 250 kid on my board. So I actually like Styles, even not just the upside. Yeah, I have Jack Larson as a 4-star as well. Peter Jones, definitely. Aeneas, definitely. Styles, top 250. Jack Larson, top 250. Yeah. And then Anthony Knapp is a 3.5-star for me, which puts him just outside of that 4-star range. He's got a shot to jump into a 4-star range. I just need to see. There's some things I need to see from him, but yeah, he's definitely got a shot. I would say he's got a shot than sort of the bottom 3 guys on the defensive side for sure.
Yeah. For me. I hope Anthony's able to put on a little bit of weight this offseason. I would like to see him play more in like the 275-ish range this year compared to like
and can he move
65, right?
Exactly. And can he move with that added weight? Definitely something I'm looking forward to seeing. Absolutely. All right, Ryan. We have a question here from let's see, Jordan Schreiber. Here, I'll ask this one real quick. Did you talk to Mark Stream about preparing the freshmen, all the players, and not just focusing on starters? As I mentioned earlier, Jordan, I did, and I'll have that article tomorrow. Jordan also asked, you are head coach of a team in the 80s. You can have Warren Moon or Jim Kelly as your franchise quarterback. Who do you choose and why? I mean, there's not a wrong answer to that, Jordan. I mean, really, I'd probably go with Warren Moon, but that's just sort of a personal preference for me. I just always liked Warren Moon better as a player than Jim Kelly. Maybe just because I hated the Bills. I mean, so that's probably more of a personal preference as opposed to an analysis. Ryan, I think they're incredibly similar players. I mean, they ran the same offense.
Yeah.
They both
deep
put
ball
up
throwers.
Yeah, deep ball throwers. They both threw a lot of interceptions because that was just the nature of the game back then. So that's not to be unexpected. Both threw for a ton of yards and both had a lot of success. Warren Moon actually was the more productive player when you look at Warren Moon had 4 seasons with over 4,000 yards. Jim Kelly never had any.
And
but Warren Moon also never played with – what's that?
I was going to say Warren Moon missed a large portion of his beginning of his career, obviously, of having to play up in the CFL.
Exactly. So. And Warren Moon, I mean, they had like Lorenzo White for a little bit, but he never had Thurman Thomas to take some of that balance off him either.
Yeah.
So
and he had pretty good wide receivers, but nobody was as good as Andre Reed or James Baldwin.
Yeah, Hayward Jeffries was good. Ernest Givens, Webster Slaughter after he left the Browns came over there. There was another guy they had, Chris something. I'm trying to remember what the heck his name was.
They had Drew Hill too, didn't they?
Yes, I think they did. Let me find this real quick. Who the receiver was? Curtis Duncan is who it was. That's who it was. Curtis Duncan. Yeah. So like you look at some of those teams, he had good receivers. There's no doubt about it. Now, did he have Andre Reed? No.
Or James Lofton.
Yeah. And Thurman Thomas was also a great
All-purpose
Great
back.
pass game weapon out of the
Yep.
backfield also.
No
So,
doubt.
yeah, I mean, neither of them had elite tight ends, but I thought Pete Metzelaars was a pretty good player. I
Yeah.
did. I thought he was a pretty good player.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna have to go with Warren Moon. But here's the reality, Jordan. If you end up with, let's say you get the number 2 pick in the draft, and Ryan has the number 1 pick, and you both need quarterbacks, and the top 2 quarterbacks in the draft are Warren Moon and Jim Kelly, you're gonna be fine.
Yeah. It's not like you're pick. It's not like you're picking between Patrick Mahomes and Daniel Jones or something like that. Like it's pretty close.
Exactly. Exactly. You're good. You're good. Oh my goodness.
I throw a
Here's
lot of shade at Daniel Jones now that I think about
I
it,
know.
but it's
Well,
very
it's
deserved.
the
Very
contract,
deserved.
man. Like
It's
I said this all the time, Ryan. The perception of how you're evaluated has a lot to do with where you're drafted and what you're paid, and it's somewhat to rightfully so. I've said this about Dak Prescott. If Dak Prescott was a top 5 overall pick, I think people would be more critical of him.
Yeah.
If Daniel Jones was a 4th round pick, I think people would be less critical of him until the contract came, of course.
It's funny, Brian. I remember when Daniel Jones was coming out of Duke. I had like a mid-second round grade on him. I liked him a decent amount. I was like, he's a good player, man. But then he goes 8th overall, and I'm just like, yeah, can't get there, man.
Yeah.
Can't get there.
And he just hasn't done anything to say, okay, you were wrong on that. I mean, that's the thing is like, you just look at the production. Now, I know the offense this year was good, but that I would say that wasn't because he was a game manager. You don't play a game manager. You don't pay a game manager $40 million. You know what I mean? Like his best year from a production standpoint was his rookie year. I mean, he had 24 touchdown passes as a rookie. So, it's strange. I mean, a guy 2 years ago in 21 had 10 touchdowns and 7 picks. And the year before that in 2020 had 11 touchdowns and 10 picks. And he just got paid $40 million. In one of those years, he's going to make over 50. It's just one of the many reasons I just can't stand the NFL. There's mediocrity gets rewarded so much greater in the NFL. It's part of the reason I don't like the NBA either. Is like if you're just a veteran, you're going to get paid a lot of money, even if you are just a mediocre player. And like you see at certain positions, Ryan, you see mediocrity get rewarded with lucrative contracts. But the best running backs in the league, the best safeties in the league, the best linebackers in the league, inside off-ball linebackers in the league can't even sniff those contracts. And I'm like, there are 20 players in the Giants better than Daniel Jones, and none of them will ever come close to making that kind of money. And it's just like, it takes some of the fun out of watching the game, to be honest with you.
There was an NBA player who just signed a 3-year, $2 million contract yesterday, and I had never heard of the guy. And he apparently averaged like 7 points and 5 rebounds last year. I'm like, oh, he gets $14 million a year for that. Nice. Good for him, man.
It really is nuts. It really is nuts, man. All right, let's get to some more questions here. But yeah, Warren Moon versus Jim Kelly, it's a win-win situation. Brandon Plensner asks, why is Al Washington able to connect with elite D-line? I mean, I would say that this has been an issue at Notre Dame for a long time, Ryan. I think I don't want to get too much into this. We'll discuss this more after the fact. But it comes down to you got to have a better strategy. I'll just leave it at that, Ryan. Right? Because some of this we can't really disclose. You have to have a better strategy. You have to work smarter. Yeah, and it's not always about working hard. Work smart.
I would also push back a little bit on it too, Brian, to say like unable to connect. I think he can connect with guys. I just don't think it's consistent all the time. We'll just leave it at that,
elite
right? Like
D-line. Yeah, that's kind of what changed my views. Because like my thing is like, who would be the elite D lineman? Like, but the question to your point though is, you've said this before. He actually connected pretty well with Elijah Rushing. Elijah Rushing isn't not right. He's not coming to Notre Dame because of anything Al Washington did. It's other factors that are going into that, right? I think it just came down to which coaches he has the best relationship with. Notre Dame would have a pretty good shot at landing him. So, look, again, that's why I say it's a work smarter and have a better plan with certain kids. I mean, it just goes back to not offering him right away, not getting on Justin Scott right. I mean, there's just a lot of things where like you messed, but you know what he did do? He got on Elijah Rushing day one, made him a priority day one, and built a great relationship with him. So I don't think that he has this issue with connecting with elite defensive linemen. I think Al Washington needs to do he needs to recruit smarter and be more consistent. Like Ryan, we were talking about this today. There are some big time recruits in the 25 class that we've talked to, Bryce Davis being one. Al Washington and Chad Bowden and those guys have done a great job with him. He's a 5-star kid that wants to visit Notre Dame.
Yes.
Then we'll talk to another highly ranked kid, and you're like, he hardly ever hears from him. Like that's what separates the really good recruiters from others is you've got to have a more efficient plan to where you're doing a great job with these 4, but you're doing a terrible job with these 6. You better flip and hope you land some of those top 4 because you're not going to be able to go over here because you didn't do a good enough job building that relationship. It's not working efficiently, not working smart, and not having a good plan. And it's very clear that some of the stuff is just flying by the seat of your pants with defensive line recruiting. And that's like he won't talk to a kid for a month and a half, and then boom, he's talking to the kid every day. And you're like where you didn't need to do that. You should have just been a little bit more consistent throughout the process. And it changes from kid to kid. That's the thing is you can't say, well, he's just not doing this or he's not doing that. Oh, he's lazy. Well, if you looked at how he's recruited Elijah Rushing, you wouldn't think that he's lazy. If you looked at how he recruited freaking Marquise Lightfoot, you wouldn't think that he's lazy, even though nobody else on the coaching staff thought as highly of Marquise Lightfoot early on, right? I mean, until they said, hey, we're not taking him, and then he stopped recruiting him. But depending on who you talk to, it's a different story, and that's the problem right there, Ryan. Is that right there is the issue, because the story with the cornerbacks with Mike Mickens is the same every kid you talk to. Chancey Stuck in receivers, it's the same with every kid you talk to. Dylan McCullough in running backs, it's the same with every kid you talk to, right? Ousmane Kroma, one of the best running backs in the 25 class, likes Notre Dame a lot. Why? Dylan McCullough. Justin Thurman, one of the most explosive athletes in the 25 class, loves Notre Dame. Why? Dylan McCullough. The consistency is there. The plan is there. It's smart. It's working efficiently, working smarter. And the reality is that you're just not getting that from Al Golden and now Washington and Chris O'Leary. You're just not. And so it's different for every coach, but I think the elite thing is more of a Justin Scott problem than it is with him not connecting with elite players for some reason. I think it's a different, like I never heard of Keon Keeley say a bad thing about Al Washington. I don't think Keon Keeley decided to go to Alabama because he didn't like Al Washington or didn't connect with Al Washington. It was other factors. So I think the premise is like there's criticism to be levied at Al Washington, no doubt. But I don't think that I would say, Ryan, to your point, that it's an issue of being unable to connect with elite D linemen in and of itself.
Right.
Because we could point to kids that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think it's a process thing. I mean, to your point too, I mean, not to go down the rabbit hole, Brian, but I mean, Al Golden's a similar one, right? Like I just talked to a 2025 kid who I think's a very good football player and highly rated. It's like he's putting in crazy effort on that one. I'm just like, why isn't that across the
right?
I just don't understand why it isn't across the board.
Exactly. All right. Let's get down to M. Holcomb 07. He says, if Notre Dame lands Kingston Viliama Asa, Justin Scott, Gearby Lambert, Bradley Shaw, and Caleb Beasley, will that be a top 3 class nationally? It will for me, and that's the only ranking that I care about.
Yeah. You're asking M. Holcomb, if you're asking about like the 247 rankings and all that stuff, it would be close. Done the math on some of these, and I think that one would be higher points wise on like 247 than last year was, right? So it would be in the ballpark, but
it also depends on who you're talking to, Ryan. If we're talking about rivals, it's a top 4 class. Actually, I've done the numbers on this, and if they get that class, they'll be 3rd or 4th. If you go back the last 5 years, they'd be no lower than 4th. If you look at 247 Sports, it's much lower because 247 Sports is much lower on Notre Dame's class for the most part than rivals. Now, not every kid, but 247 Sports has almost like a third of the class as 3 stars. And I just don't see it that way. Like they have Isaiah Canyon as a 3-star. They have Bodie Cahoon as a 3-star. They have, I mean, there's several guys on the Notre Dame class. Actually, let me pull it up right now because I actually have that ranking. So if you look at 247 Sports, they rank Isaiah Canyon, Anthony Knapp, Styles Prescott, Cole Mullins, and those are all guys that they have ranked as 3-star players. I was incorrect actually. That's rivals. Excuse me. This is 247. They have Isaiah Canyon as a 3-star, Jack Larson, Peter Jones, Anthony Knapp, Styles Prescott, Cole Mullins, Bryce Young, Bodie Cahoon, and Leonard Moore as 3-star players. Like,
Lyman
I
Moore.
look at
That's
some of that and I
amazing.
say, I just don't know how you can come to that conclusion. I
Right.
don't look. You can say, hey, I don't like Jack Larson, and I could buy you having him as a 3-star. I get it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. How you can watch Peter Jones play and say 3-star is beyond me. How you can look at Cole Mullins and Leonard Moore, Ryan, and say 3-star players is beyond me. Bodie Cahoon, I can understand. I don't agree with it, but I understand it.
Yeah.
Styles Prescott, like, it doesn't make any sense. So they're just not going to. Isaiah Canyon, seriously,
Yeah.
3-star player. So it just doesn't make any sense for me. And they also don't have Keidron Young in the top 247. They don't have Aeneas Williams out of the top in the top 247. So there's just a lot of bad rankings with 247. They have gotten, I've said this before, they've gotten progressively worse since Spartan Simmons left. And this is so far this year. And it's not just Notre Dame kids. There's some other
Yeah.
kids that I've seen ranked low where I'm like, I have no clue what they're looking at. It's bizarre. But it
Leonard
is what
Moore
it
was
is.
also a super. Leonard Moore was also always a super confusing one to me. I remember when Notre Dame obviously made a big push for him. It was like no one had him ranked as a 4-star. It was like a 3-star, and then finally, is it on 3 that has him at like 151 or whatever it is now or
Rivals.
something like that?
They dropped him
Rivals at
down to
151.
196 in their most recent update, but they still have him as a top 200 player.
Sure,
But yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Well,
they're the only
I
ones
was just
that have him as
like,
4-star.
yeah, I'm just like, so 6'2" corner, long, good film, and he's from where he's from in
Yeah.
Texas. I'm just like, what, man? Like, what are we doing here?
Yep.
He's playing against some of the best competition in the country, and he's holding it down. I never got the Leonard Moore one, man. That was so weird to me.
Yep. Yeah. So to answer your question, depending on who you talk to, it's just going to depend on who you talk to. On three's ranking is just so ridiculous, ain't worth talking about. But if they get just the first 4 of those guys, it's a surefire top 5 class for me. There's no doubt about it. But
Yeah, that's a special
it's
class, man, potentially.
yeah, it absolutely
I mean,
is.
if you get Justin Scott on top of CJ Carr and Cam Williams, then you throw in Caleb Beasley, Kingston, and Bradley Shaw, it's like that's a dang good class, man. That's
Yeah.
really, really good. And that alleviates a lot of the issues too, Brian, because because right now a couple of the spots that obviously have question marks are if linebacker is no longer a question mark if you have Kingston and Bradley Shaw in it. Like no question marks there at all. You have those 2 players and you have 2 high upside guys and Teddy Rizak and Bodie Cahoon. I'm like, cool, that's great. Safety recruiting might still be a question mark, but if I have Caleb, now I'm like, there might be some opportunities to move some corners at some point to safety.
Right.
That's going to strengthen that class. And then if you get Justin Scott, that's a home run defensive line haul in 2024. So some questions could be very alleviated if you land that class. So we shall see.
Let's get down to here's an interesting one, Ryan. This is from Zay. He says, if Sam Hartman started his career at Notre Dame, is he as good as he is now?
Is he as good as he is? Yes, but I think that the question probably is coming from a production perspective, right? And so the answer to production he might not have the 110 career touchdown passes and some of those other things, right? But is he as good as he is? Yeah, why wouldn't he be? Like I think that it's all about the development for a guy like Sam Hartman, and he'd be surrounded by a lot of talent that may have been underutilized at points. But I just think the question, honestly, Brian, for me, I think that it's coming from a production basis. So if you're asking me, would he be as productive?
Close.
The answer would be no for me. Yes.
Yeah, because he'd only be going into his 3rd year as a starter. I mean, he wouldn't have started over Ian Book. Not that he shouldn't have, but he wouldn't have. There's a difference at Notre Dame. So he most likely they don't go get Jack Cohn in 21, and that would have been his first year as a starter. You know, Jack Cohn threw for over 3,000 yards that year. I would have fully anticipated Sam would have done the same thing. This past season would have been year 2. I think we would have seen a much bigger jump in production. But, you know, he threw for average 4,000 yards the last 2 years. Just Notre Dame's offense just wasn't designed for that, Ryan. It's maybe 33 to 3,500. 28 to 32 touchdowns is probably where you'd have seen in past years. So the production and the perception would be a little different. I will say this, however, here's the crazy part, Ryan. If he would have only been a 2-year starter at Notre Dame, his perception among a lot of analysts would be much better because of the bias about he'd have done it at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame would have been a much better team last year, if we're being honest about that. So it's just the way that it is. I mean, if he would have put up anywhere close to the numbers he put up at Notre Dame, he'd be a Heisman favorite.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase, if he would have put up the numbers at Notre Dame the last 2 years that he put up at Wake, he'd be a Heisman favorite going into the season. But he did it at Wake. So, we'll have to see how that plays out. But yeah, here's an instrument. How do you lose 4 straight Super Bowls? You have to be really good to lose 4 straight Super Bowls. Do you know why? Because you have to get to 4 straight Super Bowls, right? I mean, you have to be a great team to lose the 4 straight Super Bowls. Number 2, you have a little bit of bad luck. And number 3, you run into a dynasty. I mean, 2 of those lost Super Bowls were to the Cowboys, who were a dynasty at the time, in my opinion. And they just caught better teams. I mean, that Redskins team, and what was it, 91 or 92? That was a phenomenal team. I mean, the only one that you look back on and say, their first one, Ryan, their first one was their missed opportunity. And that's the one, the Scott Norwood miss. That was the one that you look at and say, that's the one you should have had. That's the one you should have had. But that Redskins team that beat him in 91, the Redskins went 14-2 that year. And when look at one of their losses was the last game of the regular season. And if I remember correctly, because my dad was a fan of the Redskins, their last loss of the regular season was because they were 14-1, had clinched home field, and they didn't play a lot of guys. They lost to the Eagles. And then they go to the postseason. They beat a really good Falcons team. If you remember that Falcons team back then with Dion and Andre Rison and all those teams. And they beat them 24-7. They played the Lions, who were I believe the 2 seed that year. They played them. The Lions that year beat the Cowboys 38-6 in the playoffs, and the Redskins beat them 41-10 in the NFC Championship game. So they just played a better team. I mean, it's as simple as that. And so I think some of it was just bad luck outside of that first year. But here's the other thing. This is going to sound biased, and I guess it is. But that 91 team that lost to the Redskins shouldn't even been in the Super Bowl. If John Elway doesn't get knocked out of the first half of that playoff game against the AFC Championship game, they was like 10-7, and Elway got knocked out, and the Bills just ran the clock out in the second half because Gary Kubiak wasn't going to beat them. But if John Elway plays, I think they win that game. But you know what else would have happened in that Super Bowl? The Redskins would have beat the Broncos again because that was a great Redskins team. I mean, that was just a great Redskins team. So sad luck.
Crazy that Joe Gibbs won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different starting quarterbacks. Still pretty crazy stat, man.
And
in a very short amount of time.
Only one of them was even a Hall of Fame caliber player.
Yeah.
And that was Joe Theismann. I mean, he won a Super Bowl with Mark Rippon and Doug Williams. Doug Williams didn't even start most of that year. Jay Schrader started the season as a starting quarterback for the Redskins that year. So, he was a phenomenal coach. Because the one thing that they always had, Ryan? Always had great offensive lines and defensive lines. And defensive lines. Their defensive line was very underrated. Charles Mann and Dexter Manley. They always had really good, and of course they had the fastest cornerback I've ever seen in my life in Darrell Green. He was unreal.
Dexter Manley was a pretty crazy story about him being illiterate and everything, and him getting kind of pushed through. Crazy story.
Had drug problems, and it's from last I've heard, it sounds like he's doing well, so. But, man, he was talented, boy. He was really talented. Really talented. But, I mean, look, they just played better teams, Ryan. It's like, people say, Elway couldn't win the big. I'm like, name me one team that the Broncos lost in the Super Bowl with Elway that you're like, they should have beat that team. You know what I mean? Like, come on. There's no way. And same thing with the Bills. That's what's kind of sad about how people look at, choke artists. Well, they didn't choke in the first round of the playoffs or the second round of the playoffs or the league championships, but they're choke artists because they got beat by phenomenal teams in the Super Bowl. Like, that's a heck of an accomplishment that people don't celebrate enough. To get to the Super Bowl, single elimination tournament, right? 4 straight years is quite an accomplishment. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. So, Yep. All right. Let's get down to some more here, Ryan. That was a good question from Zay, though, about Sam Hartman. That's been kind of sticking in my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
Drew Benson said, would you guys share any names for a potential DB for 24 if Davis Andrew goes elsewhere? I don't think right now, other than Caleb Beasley, there's anyone really on the board right now, Ryan. I think they'll be open to a safety maybe emerging during the season, but there's nobody really on the board right now besides him.
This is a question to ask Drew in the evaluation period through the first
Yeah.
few weeks of the 2023 season, whenever it kicks
Yep.
off. Similar to how we kind of had heard of Brandon Hillman a little bit there into like October. Like that's kind of the period, because if Notre Dame doesn't have that safety and they want to push to 4 safeties in the class, then that's when you're going to start evaluating things and trying to find that type of player to this question.
Yep. Archer 452 asks, every school utilizes 2 of the same pitches. Local kids, stay home, be a hometown hero. Distance kids, blaze your own trail. How do you use those without sounding hypocritical? I don't think you do that. I can only talk about Notre Dame. I think it's about reading the kid. Honestly, it's about what's the pitch that's going to work for him, and how you do that without sounding hypocritical is you do exactly that. It's like it's every kid's different, right? And Notre Dame doesn't do the whole stay home, be a hometown hero thing. Like
they
that's just
do
not
it.
their pitch.
Be different, right? Be different. Bring back
even
like
in-state
that type of
kids.
thing.
Even
exactly.
in-state kids. It's like not a lot of Indiana kids go to Notre Dame. I mean, it's
right.
So yeah, it's exactly. It's kind of a consistent pitch. Honestly, it's selling the uniqueness of it. They don't sell the local aspect because they just can't sell that. If anything, they do. It's more, if you're going to talk about like stay consistent, it's the Catholic school thing, which is a whole different animal.
Right.
When
4 for
you're
40
talking
Catholic school. Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. There's some things that remain consistent. I think Archer, to the question, it's just the uniqueness of Notre Dame is what makes them obviously so different. Like that's what unique means, obviously. But I mean, we talk about the national brand, we talk about the independence. And I think that the biggest thing for me is that the reason for independence for Notre Dame for short and long term is that you want to remain as unique as you possibly can for the longest time. The minute that you get kind of pushed into one conference or into one box, you lose a little bit of that thing that makes you special, the thing that makes you different. And I think that that's the biggest sell to Notre Dame, is that it's not like any other place. I don't think I've ever talked to a recruit, Brian, that's visited Notre Dame where they're like, oh, that's very similar to this place that I've been to before. Like, never heard that, man. It's always different. Even if they don't love it, it's always different. It's always unique.
Yeah. There was this is a Douglas Road roundabout. It says Darrell Green at age 40 was still one of the fastest players in the NFL. Here's I read this somewhere. On his 50th birthday, I read an article where it literally said, it quoted Darrell Green as saying this. On his 50th birthday, he wanted to see how fast he could still run. And so he went out and ran a 40, and he ran a 4.5 flat at 50. Gross. That is insane. He was his speed. And it was cool because back then, like they had that NFL fastest man stuff.
Oh, I love that.
And it was like, Herschel Walker, who had insane speed, and Rod Woodson and all these guys. And every year, Darrell Green would just smoke all of them. There's one I watched. Actually, I was bored one night, and it was on ESPN. It was like on YouTube. I don't know how it came across my feed. And there was one where he like stumbles out of the gate, and some guy's got like a lead. This is like a 40-yard sprint, Ryan. And he just, just like, good gosh, he was nuts. Did you ever see the punt return touchdown he had against the Bears, where he's holding his rib cage the whole time? He had pulled a muscle in his stomach.
Yes.
And he's like,
and he still gets there.
He was nuts. He was such a good player.
I think I told this before, but my high school head coach also tried out for the Redskins back in the day. He played at NC State. And so he had gone to camp at the Redskins, and they used to do 40-yard dash times at the end of practice. And he had to run against Darrell Green. And my coach said that he ran 4.38 coming out of college, 4.38. He was like, Darrell Green beat me by 4 steps in a 40-yard dash.
That's
like,
insane.
What the heck, man? Like,
that's insane. That's nuts.
What? Like, you beat a guy by 4 strides that runs 4.38 in a 40-yard dash. Like, just think about that, man. That's wild.
That is nuts. Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. Yeah, that's. I wish that'd have been fun to be that fast. I couldn't even be that fast in a car. All right, let's go with Pete Weber.
Pete Weber's
offensive
question.
I'm sorry. I needed to catch my breath. I'm gonna let you answer. What offensive and defensive schemes do you think will fit this team's build?
Interesting question. And I think defensively, I think they have the defense that's going to fit it best, Pete. I just think it's about accentuating strengths and having easy adjustments off of it. I think 4-2-5 is the spot that I think makes the most sense because I think they are finally have the rover body types of like the modern age that you really want, right? The Jalen Sneeds, the Jay Nosberries, like that's what the rover position's really moving towards. And I love the fact that they are really starting to get those guys. And I think that Notre Dame is not the biggest defensive line in the world, but what they have is they have length at certain spots. And I think that that's playing a forward down with the body types they have, I think is very advantageous if they're an attack style 4-3, a front that is going to be able to one gap and try to create penetration. I think a 4-2-5, attack style front, because I think it's easily adjustable to get into 4-3 looks. I think it's easily adjustable to play nickel looks. I think 4-2-5 makes a lot of sense for this defense. And so I really just think that they're running the right scheme. It's about having the proper adjustments off of it, which I don't think the adjustments were as good as it needed to be last season.
Yeah. Honestly, I have no issue with the schemes that they run. I have an issue at times with the implementation of those schemes. I like the offensive scheme that they run, especially in 2021. I don't think the scheme was the problem. I think the blocking was the problem, and some of the things they do, how they implement it, were the problem. But just the scheme. When I think of scheme, I just think, here's your playbook, here's your general overall scheme. I have no problem with it. The implementation of it, and that's what Ryan's getting at, is the implementation of it is the issue. Troy McIntosh, real quick, says the last time we had a first-round defensive lineman was Ronaldo Wynn. No, actually, Jerry Tillery was the last first-round defensive lineman that Notre Dame had. Now, the last first-round defensive end was Ronaldo Wynn back in, I think, 98. Ryan, I think he went to the Bengals back in 98. But yes, first-round defensive lineman was the 2019 draft. That was with Jerry Tillery. So, yeah, just wanted to make sure that we got that clear. Christopher Galloway. Here, Ryan, I'll let you go ahead and read this one.
Christopher's question, Brian, how is the cornerback position going to look this season? I'm really curious how Jaden Mickey is developing.
So I actually was talking with someone about this the other day, and the staff absolutely loved what Jaden did this spring. So he took full advantage of Cam Hart being out. And that was the thing that he got a ton of reps this spring playing to the field because Cam was out, and took full advantage. So from what I'm told, Notre Dame's going into the season very confident in their top three corners, very confident. Now they like what Chance Tucker did this spring, so they're hoping he can kind of keep pushing this summer and fall. So they have a legitimate two-man rotation on both sides, but very happy with what Jaden did. And a big part of it was just the consistency, Ryan. That was the big thing with Jaden is he'll have 3-4 good reps and then just get smoked, and it was just because he'll overplay it or, just some of those freshman mistakes or too aggressive. He had two big problems last year. One, he's way too aggressive. And number two, he was a freshman. And he would make those freshman consistency mistakes. Well, he's cleaned up a lot of those because A, he's got more time in the system now, and he learned from some of those mistakes. And then B, Coach Mickens has worked really hard to get him to be more patient. There's a time and a place to drive on a route, but you better make sure he's really running that route. That little stick nod, that shouldn't be enough to get you to drive downhill like you're trying to get a pick six, right? I mean, it's just about, playing smarter and those type of things, which you can get away with in high school. And it's something we talked about when they signed him, is he's going to have some issues here if he's going to have to play a little bit, be a little bit less aggressive in some of these situations. And he learned from it, because that's the best way to learn, right? Is to go out there and see it and be like, remember that practice we saw in fall camp or spring ball where Braden Lindsey had to beat him by 15 yards because he just gave him a little move. And if you bite on Braden Lindsey, you're toast. I mean, you have no chance. And that's exactly what happened. And what I loved about that rep is Braden Lindsey catches the ball and scores a touchdown, and Jaden's still talking to him. He's still talking trash to him. And it's this kid's wild.
Yes.
So they're very high on what Jaden has done this offseason. Very high. So good question there. John Griselli says, Gearby is the biggest must get on the remaining 2024 board. I've seen Gearby play multiple times live. Absolute freak. Reminds me of a more advanced Ronnie Stanley at the same age. Agree or disagree? I actually like that comparison a lot. Very similar body type to Ronnie.
Similar. Yeah, because last year, and we'll see obviously what Gearby plays in as a senior, but I mean, he was about 6'6", 6'7", and 280 pounds. So he's a long-limbed, svelte, if I could use that word, type of offensive lineman. He obviously is going to be continuing to grow into his body, but he's a guy I remember, because Ronnie was the same, right, Brian? He was 285 pounds coming out of
Yeah.
Nevada, right?
And,
Like he
and
was a
part of
little
that's
bit
because
of
he
a
was playing
swing guy.
basketball. He played
Yeah.
basketball for Bishop Gorman.
Yeah.
I'll say
Yeah.
the one I think the athleticism is very similar. The body type is similar. The length is very similar. There's a ton of similarities. One big difference, and this is why Gearby was ahead of, and he talks about more advanced Ronnie Stanley. Gearby's a little bit more fundamentally sound, a little bit, not a ton, but Gearby's a much more powerful player than Ronnie. Ronnie really didn't become a good run blocker until he got to the NFL.
Yeah.
And he was an okay run blocker at Notre Dame. I mean, he would do his job and he would kind of throw his weight around a little bit, but he wasn't going to just drive you off the line. He became a much better run blocker in the NFL than he, which is it's a different run game, But Gearby's going to show up, and that's a strength of his game already. I mean, so that's and part of that's the system you come from. I mean, Ronnie showed up in Notre Dame a pretty good pass blocker. I mean, that's just something he was good at. But I like that comparison quite a bit, Ryan. I think that one fits very well. Like body type, length, all of it.
Gearby is one of the few offensive linemen in this class, John, that I watched and I was like, yep, I get that, man. I completely understand that. There's some kids that are super hyped that I've watched and I'm just like, man, I don't really get that one. Like, I don't really get that one. Gearby, it makes sense, though. He makes sense.
Yep. Here's one from W.O. Lewis. It says, Brian, you talking about needing to close. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, sorry. It was towards you, so I didn't know if you wanted me to ask and then you answer.
How about this? We'll just come if it's that way. I'll just let you.
Yes.
I'll let you read it that way. Okay. So that way we.
Rip through.
My apologies. Let's go ahead.
No, you're fine. Brian, you were talking about needing to close on recruits. Can you give an example of how you personally closed on a 50 recruit that was decided between your school and another?
I mean, really what you have to find is you have to determine, because you win some, you lose some, right? And you have to determine what's the most important thing to this kid. And do we win in that area? And if you don't, then you have to say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things that we do win on and sell those? If you have it, then you get it. So, for example, one of the recruits that I lost, and I probably had as good a relationship with this kid as anybody I've ever recruited. He was a running back from St. Anne Bellsfield in Virginia. And so actually, was he? Yes, he was at St. Anne's. And it was one of those things where it was us and Johns Hopkins. And the field he wanted to go into was, I mean, you're talking about Johns Hopkins. Muhlenberg was a very good school, but it's Johns Hopkins. And so I had to take the next 3 or 4 things and just sell the heck out of that. And then still kind of convince him that, hey, this is still a great degree as well. But at the end of the day, that one thing was going to win the day. I couldn't do enough to convince those other things. So sometimes there's going to be something like that, Ryan, where you're just the thing that's most important is just so much better at that school. And we've seen Notre Dame win a lot of those battles where academics is the most important thing to a kid, or being a first-round draft pick for an offensive lineman is the most important thing. And Notre Dame just blows everybody out of the water, and they get that kid even though maybe reasons 2, 3, 4, and 5 aren't the same. So really it just comes down to if you have the thing that he cares about the best, you sell the heck out of that. And then make sure that those other things are also part of your pitch. If you're not, then you have to somehow try to convince him that these other factors are just as important and you're way better there. And that kind of helps negate that one thing that is ultimate decision-making mode. And then the last thing it comes down to it is honestly, you can't close if you hadn't already built up that relationship. That's the other thing too, Ryan. Yeah. It's like you can't be trailing on a kid and you didn't put in the work and you didn't build up the relationship and now it's closing time and I got to step it up. You're not going to get that kid. You're just not. That has to already be there. But there just comes to that point where you've just got to try to hit those last things. And then there's always like little things you can do that we couldn't do at the Division III level. Because if we brought our greatest player in to meet a kid, he'd be like, who the freaking heck is that guy? You know what I mean? But, there's some of that. If you're trailing, it's some of that stuff. It's try to find something to wow him, some kind of new data intel to kind of wow him. Some teams will do that, and it works for some kids and it doesn't work for others. But it's really just about the consistency of the messaging, knowing what's important to a kid, and know whether or not you need to sell what's important to him even more because you win there, or you've got to maybe try to convince him that while that's important, these other things that you do win at are also just as important. To me, that's really what closing comes down to, Ryan. You have some thoughts on that?
I think it's a relationship, and I think it always is, right? Like it's because they're. I mean, you talk about it, Brian. There's a uniqueness to everybody's pitch that makes their school at the end of the day. But I think relationships are the most important because there's some kids that just kind of tune you out when maybe the pitch is missing something, right? But those relationships, I think, can really I think they can fill gaps, and I think that that's the biggest thing because as much as we always say, and I know people say this all the time, go to a school for the school, not for the coach. We know that that's not true. Like it's not. It's like kids go to schools for coaches all the time. Those relationships matter very much, and I think that that's like the biggest thing is why are we harping on maybe some coaches not being as consistent as they should be in the relationship building process? Because it matters in the end, right? Like that matters at the because you're not just selling it to a kid, you're also selling it to parents. And what better to sell to a parent than like, hey, we're going to be consistently here for this kid. How can we show you that? Because we're consistently here to answer all of your questions and to build a relationship with you as well. Like we are practicing what we preach. And I really think that matters a lot to kids and to parents
Absolutely.
and to sports system
Absolutely.
and to coaches and everyone and
Absolutely.
everyone.
Tyler Evans with a super chat. Tyler asks, "Thank you for super chat, Tyler. Do you think the Broncos would have, if the Broncos would have played the Vikings in Super Bowl 98, that's the 98 Super Bowl, so it would have been Super Bowl 33. Do you think they would have beaten the Vikings?" I do. I mean, obviously, I have no clue how to prove that, but I do. I think for the same reason that they beat the Packers the year before and beat the Falcons is they could control the clock. I mean, they just could, and they had a pretty good blitz system back then that allowed them to go, get after the quarterback and keep their quarterbacks from getting into it. So that was two of the better. It wasn't an elite defense, but it was a good enough defense with Alfred Williams and Neil Smith, and and a good blitz package with Romanowski and the different guys they had that they could get after it a little bit, but they could just control the clock. Terrell Davis was the best postseason running back of my life. I mean, and again, I saw John Riggins at the tail end of his career. I know that Terrell Davis beat John Riggins consecutive 100-yard postseason rushing games. He had like 8 in a row. He was a phenomenal postseason running back. And Denver was just a phenomenal rushing team in the postseason. I think he had like I said, 8 straight 100-yard games, I believe, something like 7 or 8. So it would have been the same story there. I mean, and I don't get into the whole, the Falcons beat the Vikings, therefore the Broncos would have beat the Vikings. That's not how it works, and that's not my argument for it. I look at that Vikings team, and as phenomenal as that Vikings team was, I think Denver had the better team. That was a tremendous Broncos team that year. I mean, just a tremendous Broncos team.
That
They
Vikings
started,
team was the 15-1 where Gary Anderson missed the
yeah,
field goal, right, against the
yeah.
Falcons. Yeah. Yep.
And the problem, I mean, you look at the Vikings that year, they give up 31 points, 28 points, 24 points, 27 points, 24 points, 36 points, 22 points, 28 points. Gave up 30 in the overtime game to the Falcons. They weren't a great defensive football team, and they would have had a tough time, in my opinion, stopping that Broncos offense. I mean, and I think Denver would have. I mean, Denver had some weapons too. Like people forget, they didn't win Super Bowl 33 because of Terrell Davis. He had 100 yards, but they won that game because John Elway just ripped up the Falcons. I mean, that's just pretty much what it was. Not a competitive game. It really wasn't.
Yeah.
So I think they would have, but who knows? I mean, who knows? I have no idea. That was a great Broncos. That's the one that started 13-0, lost to the Vikings, and then they. Have I ever told the story about that Dolphins game that year, Ryan? That was the only time I ever saw John Elway play was that year, 98, where they played the Dolphins on that Monday night. And come to find out, Shanahan showed the Dolphins nothing because they had already clinched home field, and they knew based on how the rankings were they were going to get the Dolphins again. Still pisses me off to this day. It's like very selfish of you, Mike Shanahan, because you didn't realize I was in the stands. Only game I got to see John Elway play, they lost. So, but that was a phenomenal team. Like they beat the Dolphins like 38-3 in the rematch in the postseason. It was nuts. And took a knee at like the 5-yard line, Ryan. They were going in and they took a knee at the 5 at the end of the game. So it was it was a really good team. That'd have been a heck of a Super Bowl though. It really would have. That'd have been too.
Yeah.
It would have been a little bit more higher scoring, I think, than that. Because what was it, 34-19? I think it's the final score
Something like
of
that.
the
Yeah.
Falcons game, and it wasn't
Because
really
that
that
was
close.
what
I mean,
Randall Cunningham was the quarterback that year, right? For the Vikings.
of that Vikings team, yeah, had Chris Carter,
Yeah.
Randy
Yeah.
Moss. It was a very good Vikings team.
Robert
Their
Smith.
defense just wasn't that good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just John Randall on the defense.
Yep, he was really good.
Yes,
Tyrell Wilson, Super Chat. Thank you, Tyrell. What do you think happens if Jimmy and Golden come back for their senior years in 2010, which, as we know, was Brian Kelly's first season at Notre Dame?
What was their record in 2010? Was it
they were 8-5? Yep,
8-5. Yeah,
they were 8-5, and so let's just kind of go through it because I've had this conversation before, Ryan, and I think that team would have been very, very good. So they lost to Michigan by 4, and if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
That was the game where Dane Christ got hurt. Michigan took the lead when Dane got hurt. Dane came back in, and they put in Nate Montana and then Tommy Reese into that game. Dane comes back in. Notre Dame retakes the lead, and then Denard has that touchdown run at the end. If Jimmy's playing in that game and they have Golden Tate, they don't lose that game. They lost the next game to Michigan State, 34-31 in overtime. They do not lose to Michigan State in overtime with Jimmy Golden. They lost to Navy that year, do not lose to Navy with Jimmy and Golden, and they don't lose to Tulsa. I still think they lose to Stanford. I do. I think Stanford dominated them back then. There's no way, because the defense still wasn't going to be good enough to beat Andrew Luck. Now, I think it would have been a much more competitive game, Ryan, but if you have Jimmy Golden and Michael Floyd and Tyler Eifert and Kyle Rudolph with what Brian Kelly was doing offensively and the backfield they had with Theo Riddick in the slot, that team's 11-1 in my view, because they weren't that far away from being 10-2 as it was. I mean, you outplayed Michigan when your starters in the game. You lose in overtime to Michigan State, and you lose by a point to Tulsa in a game where you throw a freaking interception while you're already in field goal range, right? I mean, can we agree that doesn't happen if Jimmy Clausen's the quarterback? You know what I mean? I think they would have been a pretty darn good team. It would have been a really good team.
I refuse to talk about that Tulsa game. I absolutely refuse to talk about that Tulsa game.
I get it.
It's gross.
I get it.
Gross game.
Patrick Tolan with a super chat. Thank you. Coaching D3, I always tried to not negatively recruit other schools. What would you say that aspect is the same or gotten worse in the last 5 years? I actually think it's not as bad as it used to be. I really don't, because I think there's so much for schools to sell now. They have to focus so much on their NIL deals and all this. There's a lot of negative recruiting. But Ryan, it used to be really bad, because the thing is like now it's so easy to prove some of the things that you'd say about people false. I mean, there's just so much. I can go down Google and in 30 seconds find out the way you told me is complete bull crap. I mean, that's part of it too, right? I mean, we're back in the day. It's like you can make up some rumor and no one would know about it until after the fact. Like, wait a minute, they said what about this? It's like, I had no idea. Where now it's like, all the people talking to these kids and social media and kids feeling like they have more of a voice now and all that. Like, there's no way some of the stuff that people said in the past would have got by. Like, just no way from a negative recruiting standpoint. So I actually don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I don't. Now, is there still negative recruiting? Absolutely. There's still negative recruiting. It's just, to me, it's a little different than it used to be. That's just kind of my 2 cents.
I just think for me, Brian, it's like, because I think you made a great point. It's very hard to lie nowadays, right? It's just like, there's a thing called Google that I could quickly find a lot of this information if you're going to lie to me in that instance, right? Like I can look up graduation rates and win-loss records and records against different teams and all first round picks that you've developed, and like you can't lie as much. So I feel like natural maturation it's died down a little bit. I always come to the fact that like there's only a couple things that you could really push against Notre Dame for as far as like the negative recruiting stuff. But I hope at some point Notre Dame is able to alleviate that list a little bit, and that list starts to really shrink. Because again, like if we ever get to a point where it's just like the only ammo someone has in the holster is, it's cold up there, guys. You're going to need a jacket. It's like, okay, man, I'll get my jacket. All right, I'll get my jacket. We'll be all right.
It's like Corey Miner's mom with the best story ever, where she said, I can buy you a jacket. I can't buy you a Notre Dame degree. It's like,
very true.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. Mr. 2.0, if Jimmy Clausen was the QB for Brady Quinn's Notre Dame teams, how good would they have been? Not as good. Look, Jimmy
Yeah.
Clausen was a better pure passer than Brady Quinn. Brady Quinn was a winner. I mean, he was look, he had a funky throwing motion. He wasn't the most accurate guy in the world. He was a phenomenal leader, and he was a great winner. And that's just a simple fact of it right there. So, no, I don't think those teams would have been as good. I think there's other teams that would have been better because and look, Brady Quinn was all those things. He was still a tremendous college quarterback those 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
He's tough
you're
as
talking about a guy that
nails,
threw
man.
right, 16 he had 69 passing touchdowns and 14 interceptions in a 2-year stretch. That's really good. And was over 70 touchdowns total because he had some rushing touchdowns in there in a 2-year stretch. He was a tremendous player. So while I think that Jimmy would have made the 2010 team way better, yes, he doesn't make Brady Quinn's teams better. And that's not a knock on Jimmy. It just he wasn't anywhere close to the leader that Brady was. And people forget Brady's size helped him avoid a lot of sacks during those
Yeah.
2 years that Jimmy would not have been able to avoid. It just, I mean, even if I believe correctly, remember that throw he made to Samardzija in 05 against Purdue that Samardzija caught one-handed? If I remember correctly, there's like some guy dragging Brady down, or like Jimmy doesn't make those plays because Jimmy wasn't as mobile. And this isn't a shot at Jimmy. You won't find a bigger pro Jimmy Clausen person, I think, than me, outside of maybe the Clausen family, just because I think he was a very talented player and played on some crap teams. And I've said to people, could you imagine how bad Notre Dame would have been if they didn't have Jimmy Clausen? Well, they didn't win with Jimmy Clausen. I'm like, yeah, you know how bad they would have been if they didn't have Jimmy Clausen? So,
Right.
but looking at it, Ryan, I mean, he wouldn't have made the 05 and 06 teams better. No way, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's like Brady Quinn. It was like the intangible stuff, right, Brian? I mean, like you could look at the kid and be like 6'3", 230, strong arm, good athlete, all that type of stuff. But Brady Quinn was just such a great leader, man. Like he was
Yes.
just a guy that people follow, and that's why that to this day he's such a great representative of Notre Dame. It's just like that kid, that guy is a leader. I mean, what at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, at the baseline, Brady Quinn is not just he was just a really talented quarterback at Notre Dame. He was a guy that people wanted to follow, and I
Yeah.
completely get it. I still want to follow him.
Yeah.
He's the type
Yeah.
of guy that you want in front of you. So
Mm-hmm.
I respect him, man. He was tough as nails. He was a great leader. I loved Brady Quinn as a football player. Loved him.
Yep. Agree. Got a few more questions here, Ryan. Here's an interesting one from Lou Holtz Thunder and Bolts. 2 questions. One is, what is your favorite concession stand food while enjoying CFB games in person? And 2, what item is Notre Dame concession sorely missing for game day? So, Ryan, I don't know that I could answer the second one. I have no clue. I don't really do concessions at Notre Dame. You have been to some games.
Yeah.
So I'll let you answer those 2 first. I can at least answer the first one.
I feel like a hot dog at any sporting event is a pretty solid choice personally. If I'm in Philadelphia, though, a cheesesteak is also very good because they got Chicky and Pete's obviously in the stadium. So if that is on the menu, that would be kind of my pick. But I think just generally speaking, like what is a solid choice no matter where you go, it's a ballpark hot dog. Like it's just a consistent thing. I mean that a soft pretzel, some peanuts, like those are kind of the staples for me.
Mine is pretzels. I'm a big pretzel. If you can have a good pretzel, at a ball game, I'm good. I'm not someone who necessarily likes to eat at ball games. I mean, that's what tailgates are for. And that's what going out after the game is for. If it's a noon or a 3 o'clock game, but I was never a big eat at a ball game. But I'm whether it's a baseball game, football game, whatever. If you got a good pretzel and some pop, I'm good to go. I don't
Okay.
know. I will say this. I guess I could say this because I have been to a couple like spring games in Notre Dame in the past. Their pretzel game needs some work from what I remember, Ryan. So that would be
I don't
the
even
only thing
remember
that I
if they're
could
any
think
good
of.
or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I learned a couple years ago. Like I went to a lot of Notre Dame games in 2021 when they had the vaccine policy. So I couldn't be in the stand. I couldn't be in the press box, but I could
Yeah.
be in the stands right behind the bench, which makes total sense. But fortunately not an issue anymore. But I was there working, so I wasn't like doing the concessions thing. I was there basically covering the game from the stands instead of the press box, essentially. So little bit of a different animal in that instance. Here's one from let's see here. Let's get down to JHT 1988. What role do you see Jaden Osbury playing this year? Does he have a chance to play outside of special teams?
I think he has a chance. I mean, it's one of those situations where what are you going to do though with Jack Kyle? Like, are you going to be more willing to play Jack Kaiser sometimes on the inside? Because that will obviously unease some reps at the rover position. Because, I mean, ideally, it would be great if Jack Kaiser is able to play a lot inside and you can kind of rotate a little bit with Jalen Sneed to get Jaden Osbury some reps at rover. So I think it's possible. He's a really good football player. If nothing else, though, I think that he's going to play a lot of special teams. I know you're saying besides special teams, but like Jaden needs to play some sort of football, in my opinion, in 2023.
Yeah, agree. He definitely has a chance to play. He's that good of a player. It's not going to be easy. I have a very interesting article up today, Ryan, on the front page at irishbreakdown.com. And it's about how the Notre Dame linebackers are getting a lot of love outside the program. Athlon and Phil Steele both rank Notre Dame's linebackers as among the 10 best in college football next year. You tell a Notre Dame fan that and they're going to lose their minds.
You know, it's funny,
it is funny how it is ironic how the usually it's like the fans overhype the team. And in the case of the linebackers, it's like outsiders are like, we don't know why you guys hate this group so much. I still feel like Maris' play has poisoned everyone on the entire linebacking core last year. But it's kind of interesting if J.D. Bertrand played as many snaps as in 2022 as he did in 2021, but had the production numbers at the same level he did in 2022, right? So the same production rate he had in 22, but had the same number of snaps as 2021 because he didn't get ejected twice. He has over 106 tackles and 11 tackles for loss if he played the same number of snaps he did the year before. But apparently he sucked, right? So it is kind of interesting. So it's not going to be as easy as people think for a freshman linebacker to play. But Jaden Osbury is good enough to force his way onto the field. So Nolan Ziegler is good enough to force his way on the field. Jalen Sneed is, and so is Drake Bowen. Will they do it? Will they be given the opportunity? I think that's the bigger unknown at this point in time, Ryan. But I hope Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen and those other young linebackers are playing a ton at the very least because Notre Dame's blowing a lot of people out and they're getting a lot of playing time at the end of games. Give those kids a chance to see what they can do. Ryan, that's something that's interesting about September is if Notre Dame can handle their business against Navy, Tennessee State, and Central Michigan, we should get a chance to see a lot of the younger players, which then says, okay, what does that then do for you later in the year? Do those guys earn those opportunities and maybe play a little bit more? It's going to be very interesting. Very interesting to see how they play.
Let's hope, man. There have been some games over the last couple of years where you're like expecting that to be the game where you get some young guys some playing time, and then it just does not turn out quite that way. So I'm hoping we see a lot of them early on in the season. And it is funny though, Brian. I mean, to your point, I've seen some spring grades. Obviously, I know you have as well for like the NFL as far as some Notre Dame guys, and 2 out of 3 of those incumbents at linebackers have draftable grades from the NFL right now. So it's kind of funny how the narrative's a little bit different on that side.
It is. One of those guys that has I saw Phil Steele, his preseason magazine. He actually had Maris Louisville ranked higher than J.D. Bertrand, and I just wanted to scream. So it's like, okay, you lost me a little bit with that one. All right, let's get a super chat here from Tyler Evans. Which second-year head coach is under more pressure this year? Brent Venables, Mario Cristobal? This is a good one. Or Billy Napier? I like this question. Thank you for the super chat, Tyler. This is a very fair question, right? Because I don't think there's a no-brainer answer for either of those guys. But I would say right now, I would rank 1 to 3. I would go Napier 1, Venables 2, Cristobal 3. The reason I say Cristobal 3, even though he had a rough year last year, is they're recruiting pretty well, and he's an alum, and the previous coach was a failure, basically. So you're going to give an alum a little bit more of a pause. I go Venables next because they had a rough year. Again, recruiting at a very high level, and I just think that they're poised for their schedule sets up better for a little bit of a bounce back this year. And I put Napier 1 because and part of the thing with Venables too is I think Venables is going to get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because the way Lincoln Riley left and how so many kids left the program after Lincoln Riley left. It's a completely different situation than what the other 2 guys walked into. I go Napier first for a couple reasons, Ryan. One is obviously he's starting to recruit better this year, but he didn't recruit well last year. And so his first year recruiting was not good. Starting to pick it up a little bit now, which is going to help him a little bit. But I think the second reason is of the 3 fan bases that we're talking here, Florida has the most insane of those and the most, you've got to be kidding me with how you're like, you fired Dan Mullen a year after he played in the SEC title game. And in 3 of his first years, they won 10 or more games. and you fired him, like that is a fan base and an administration that has a very unrealistic view of who they are.
Yeah.
And so, fair or not, that is what that's the world Billy Napier's living in right now. And I don't think it's fair, but that's the reality. You struggle again this year, you're not guaranteed a third year. That's how nuts I think Florida is right now. So I just I think he has the most pressure.
I agree. I think it's Napier pretty easily number one for me personally, because I think a couple of the things you hit on there, Brian, is that one, I think Florida is a very impatient program, very impatient. Just obviously in support of the football team, and nothing wrong with that. But I just think that there are some unrealistic expectations that do get thrown out of there. And I look at that team. I looked at that roster the other day. I don't know if Florida's going to be very good in this year, man. Like
Yeah.
I'm not sure, especially with that quarterback situation. Like I think it's going to be a little bit of an year, so I'm not 100% sure about that one. Brett Venables,
I mean, you're not on the Graham Mertz train, Ryan. You're not.
I've never been on the Graham Mertz train, man. But
you're saying
have,
just because he couldn't dominate the SEC West, I mean Big Ten West, you don't think he's going to go to the SEC and thrive? What I'm so confused by your analysis here, Ryan. I'm just trying that sarcasm thing out. Seeing how it feels. Taking it for a little test drive.
I got you, man. Well, I think though, kind of a couple of things that you hit on, I think are absolutely correct. Is that Brett Venables? It was a little bit of a depleted roster. A lot of guys did leave, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to rebuild, obviously, the depth a little bit and be able to get it back. And I think that they're going to take a step forward in year two. Again, I'm still not there with Brett Venables, the head coach. I'm just not sure if he's the guy there long term, but it'll be better than it was last year. Like it'll be better than 6 and 7, in my opinion. It'll be a little bit better. Miami, I just don't think Miami really cares that much about the program right now. Like that's just kind of where we are. Like I just don't think they really care about being that great of the team. And like you said,
especially with an alum leading the team.
Also an alum. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So and it's not a great roster. Like he didn't walk into a great roster there either. So I think the pressure of Florida is where it really separates it for me.
I agree. Let's go here, Ryan. I want to say this real quick. Anthony Solomon said it's very troublesome to hear the lack of faith in Al Golden and getting younger guys in the game. Part of me wishes he would have stayed in the NFL. Let's be clear here. This is not new to Al Golden, folks. This is the same problem we had with Clark. I had this problem with Clark Lee. I had this problem with Bob Diaco. I had this problem mainly with Brian Kelly. This is a problem across the country. Coaches don't like playing young players unless that young player is just insanely good, because coaches are a breed of people that like things to be done a certain way, and guys with more experience tend to be able to do those things at a higher level. So this isn't unique to Al Golden. So I don't want this because he's not doing some other things the way he needs to, Ryan. What happens is anytime you say something like, I don't have faith in him to do this, which is a criticism, it comes across as this. Guys, if Clark Lee never left, we'd be having the same complaint, because that was a complaint I had with Clark Lee as well. Why aren't you playing more younger guys? Why aren't you getting those younger guys in the game? That was an issue I had with Coach Lee. So that is something that is a coaching problem in general, and it really requires – Coach Freeman had some very interesting things to say about why he believes what he believes about why it's important that they do that and why you need a plan and who he learned it from, and how his experience as a player on the opposite end of that, as the veteran who didn't want to come off the field for a younger guy at any point in time, it helps play into why he is the way that he is on it. So it's some very interesting takes. I'll have that up tomorrow. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. So I think that's not a shot on Al Golden as in like fire him and hire 20 other people. Because guess what? Right. The majority of the other 20 people, it's going to be a similar criticism. It's going to be up to the head coach to say, you need to do this. That's just a thing that's there. So I don't want that to turn into Al Golden is uniquely bad at something. Recruiting wise right now, he is. Let's be real about that. The defense was not as bad as people think it was last year. Do you know that last year Notre Dame, Ryan, and this was in the article that I wrote today, and I know you haven't had a chance to read it because you've been on the phones and stuff all morning, but I'm going to give you some numbers. In games against Power 5 opponents, and I believe last year Notre Dame played what? 8, 9 Power 5 opponents last year, Ryan, I believe right. is what they did. So let me just look this up. Notre Dame played 9 Power 5 opponents last year. Okay, so against Power 5 opponents, this was Notre Dame's ranking last year defensively. they ranked 18th in scoring defense, 12th in total defense, 12th in yards per play allowed, and 12th in rushing defense. And I think they were 16th in yards allowed per rush last year against Power 5 opponents. Guys, that's not bad. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't. And they weren't good enough in clutch moments. There were some clutch moments that they needed to be better. But Al Golden's not being asked to turn a garbage defense into a championship caliber defense. He's being asked to turn a good defense into a great defense.
Really good defense, yeah.
There's a difference. And that's the frustration with some of this, is some of the stuff that becomes so hyperbolic that we're not even having like a rational conversation about this anymore. Like, we need to be having a conversation about Al Golden did not do a good enough job last year because the goal is championships. You need to make the 3rd and 9 stop against Marshall. You do that, you win the game. You need to make a stop against Stanford after you just went up and got a touchdown. You didn't do it, right? Okay, I get all that. You need to play better in those moments. I did not like the game plan against USC. But there's a lot of games that you look at last year and say they don't win that if the defense doesn't play the way that they played. I mean, Ohio State and Clemson, 2 teams that going into the last week of the regular season were considered likely playoff teams, averaged 17.5 points against Notre Dame in their 2 games.
Yeah.
One scored 21, one scored 18. If you go look at the numbers, Notre Dame held, I think Phil Steele had this number, Notre Dame held opponents last year on average to 75 yards below their season average in total offense. And some of that was garbage yards. Like, if you look at what North Carolina did, North Carolina gained, I think, over 200 yards in the 4th quarter when the game was over.
Yeah.
So his recruiting stinks right now. Let's be real about it. He needs to do a better job coaching this year. But the narrative about how bad the defense was last year is just not based on reality, in my view. And there's no metric that backs up the point of view that this defense was bad last year. It was good, but good doesn't win you championships. And I think that speaks volumes about the standard that was set by Elko and Diaco and Freeman and Clark Lee, right? But this was not a bad defense. This is a good defense. It just needs to get better. That's the key. And I think that it will in year 2. I think the question right now, Ryan, isn't will it be better? The question is, will it just be like just a little bit of growth, or will they take a big jump? I think that's really, to me, the only question that I have going into the season.
Yeah. I mean, I think by natural maturation, it's going to be better, right? But to your point, Brian, is it going to be a championship level defense, right? Does it go from good to that type of defense? I think that's a major question mark. I mean, look, I just really... We get into this, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I know I've talked about this on the podcast. We are just taught so much today to be on one side or the other. We can't ever just have middle ground and have a conversation. Like, it's just very frowned upon in today's world for whatever reason. It wasn't good enough, but it wasn't bad. Just like a lot of things that are happening in Notre Dame, right? It's like, oh, the recruiting sucks or it's great. It's like, no, it's very good, but it can still improve in certain areas, right? Like, we know that for certain. So yeah, we need to be able to have those real conversations, because that's the only time that growth happens. Like, if we're just very overly critical about everything, it's just not good. It's not great.
And this comment from Andrew Gilmore is part of having a good conversation. This is a very fair response. He asks, he says this, Ryan, he goes, where is that the first part of this? Oh, here we go. He says, but wasn't our slow offense a factor in all those stats? When you run the ball the entire second half, you eat the clock. That's a fair point. Notre Dame last year ranked 18th in time of possession last season. When you look at overall time of possession, they ranked 38th in time of possession against those Power 5 teams that I talked about. So they had the ball for 31 minutes and 40 seconds. So it's not like they were Navy or Air Force, so they're having the ball for 36 seconds or 36 minutes a game. It's a fair point, but also, Andrew, that's also why I included yards per play. Because when someone's just giving you yards, that can be misleading for things like Andrew talked about, right? Where you're controlling the clock and you limited teams to, X amount of fewer possessions, and that's why you gave up less yards and those type. That's a very fair point. Notre Dame last year ranked 35th in total plays allowed. So if it was about, kind of looking at it from a standpoint of, then you look at it from a Power 5 standpoint, right? And they were higher, right? Nope, they weren't. They ranked 65th in total plays against Power 5 teams last year. can be misleading because there's some teams that didn't play a whole lot. So what you have to look at then is to say, okay, where were they yards per play in those categories? And they ranked in the top 20 in yards per play allowed as a total defense and yards allowed as a rushing yards allowed last season when it comes to how they were against Power 5 teams as well. And so let me just pull it up just to give you the exact number. Notre Dame ranked 12th last year in yards per play allowed. They were tied with Florida State for 12th at 5.0. Right above them was Clemson at 4.98, and right above them was Georgia at 4.95. So Notre Dame is a rounding number away from being tied with Georgia for context, right? So I've always say this, Ryan, yards per play sometimes is going to give you a better idea of how you played compared to others. And here's the other thing too, Ryan. If you take out teams that played 3 or fewer games against Power 5 teams, they jump up to 8th because Air Force only played 2 games against a Power 5 team. Middle Tennessee played 1, and then Liberty and Cincinnati both played 3. So if you take away teams that weren't Power 5 teams, which would be Air Force, Middle Tennessee, Liberty, and Cincinnati, they ranked 8th among Power 5 teams in yards allowed per play last season. You go to their rush defense last year, and you look at how Notre Dame performed in that area. They were 14th, They were 14th in yards allowed per rush against Power 5 teams. If you take out the non-Power 5 opponents, Ryan, there were 6 of them ahead of them that played 1, 2, or 3 games against Power 5 opponents. So there, you're now talking about them ranking 8th amongst Power 5 teams in yards allowed per rush. So again, this takes out the number metric of it and looks at it from the standpoint of how do they do in regard to yards per play. It's a much better story. And then they rank 25th in yards allowed per pass attempt against Power 5 opponents. And when you consider that you played Ohio State and C.J. Stroud and USC and Caleb Williams, that's a pretty good number right there. So again, Andrew asked the right question, Ryan.
Yep.
Very good question. But that's why you need to look at the yards per play, because that is going to, that's going to give you a much better indication. So it just goes to show that this defense for good stretches of the year last year was pretty good. They just didn't finish games well, just like they didn't finish drives well. And they didn't end the season on a real strong note against USC without Cam Hart, without Tariq Bracy, and a game plan that I didn't love. And Marcus, I had some on the board about Coach Freeman's comments on their game plan against USC as well, Ryan. So again, as you said, we need to be able to have a conversation about how it wasn't good enough based on the standard that Notre Dame has, which is championships.
Yeah.
But it's turned into where if it's not championship, it sucks. And that's just not rational adult conversation. That's just social media flame throwing that just is unproductive, and why I hate social media.
Well,
we need to be able to have an honest conversation about it.
I even think about it with coaches sometimes, Brian. It's like not every coach that gets fired did a bad job. It's just sometimes it's just not good enough. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just kind of hit a ceiling. Like we have to be able to just look at a guy and be like, yeah, he was a good coach. Maybe he just wasn't the right coach. Maybe he wasn't the coach that needed to get him to this level. Happens all the time. Andy Reid with the Philadelphia Eagles. So Andy Reid's one of the better coaches of all time. Andy Reid with the Philadelphia Eagles, it just had run its course. You were just like, you're going to be as good as you are ever going to be with Andy Reid under the Philadelphia Eagles. He goes to Kansas City. Now he's won multiple Super Bowls. Like that's just kind of where you are, man. It just doesn't make the statement 100% true is kind of where I'm going with that. You know what I mean? Like it just got to be able to be real with ourselves, man. We got to be real.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's get to some more here, Ryan, as we wrap this thing up. Let's go to this is an interesting one here real quick. Todd Brammy 4, I think is where I'm going to go with that one. He says, what do you think is more likely to happen in the next 4 years by Notre Dame player? A 6 TD game by quarterback, a 4 TD game by wide receiver, a 5 TD game by running back, and defensively a 5 sack performance or 3 INTs. I think the first and the last one of those are by far the most likely things to happen.
Yeah.
6 touchdowns by a quarterback and 3 interceptions by a player. I mean, we've already seen the 3 interception thing. It just happened. We saw it this past year. And I believe, go ahead, Rye.
I was just going to say defensive player getting 5 sacks in a game is like, that's last on that list in my opinion, like that.
I would agree. I would agree. I think I'd say the 5 touchdowns by a back is more doable because, rushing and receiving is kind of how I took that. The 6 touchdowns by a quarterback. I mean, that's not hard to think at all. I mean, Jack Cohn had 5 touchdowns in his last game at Notre Dame. I believe Ian Book had some games where he had close to that. I think Ian Book might have had a 6 touchdown game, Ryan. Actually, he had 5 touchdowns against passing touchdowns against Bowling Green, no rushing touchdown. He had 5 touchdowns against Navy, no rushing touchdowns. He was close there. See, do you have any other games where he was at 5? Nope, that's the only 2 he had at 5. So he had a bunch of 4s and 5s. So, I mean, if Ian Book's going to do that, this isn't a shot on Ian Book at all. It's just something that you could do. I mean, Wake Forest, his first career start, he had 5 touchdowns, and they yanked him in the 4th quarter because they were blowing Wake Forest out. So, you remember that game, right? Like it was like 56-27. They yanked him. I mean, he could have had another touchdown that game. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns. So certainly, I think it's doable. It's very doable. 4 touchdowns by a receiver, that's a tough one. That's a real tough one. And a 5-sack performance. Heck, I'll take a 3-sack performance, man. I'll take that.
Seriously.
Because what was the most we saw? We had Jerry Tillery had like 4 against Stanford in 2018, right? Am I correct on that?
I believe so.
So we've seen a guy get close, but that's going to be a tough one. Yeah, Jerry had 4 against Stanford in 2008, and then Jerron Jones had a crazy tackle for loss game against Miami in 2016. Yeah, let me find that stat. That was in the 2016 season. That was a crazy number. Let me find Jerron's number. Jerron had 6 tackles for loss against Miami, and one of them was a sack. So we've seen a couple games like that, but that's hard to do. That's really hard to do. I'd probably put 4 touchdowns and 5 sacks at the bottom of that list.
I agree.
I'd probably do that.
I wonder how many games Sam Hartman had if he had any 6 touchdown performances at.
He has. I mean, he had 6 touchdowns against Clemson last year.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So
had a lot,
yeah, he had 6 touchdown passes against Clemson last year. Let's see here. So let's go to 6 touchdown games for Sam Hartman. So he had 6 touchdowns passing against Clemson last year. And let's see, did he have any rushing Nope, no rushing touchdowns. He had 2 6-touchdown games last year. He had 5 touchdown passes and a rushing touchdown against Boston College. So he did that twice last year. He actually has a 7 touchdown game, Ryan. He had 5 touchdown passes and 2 rushing touchdowns in a 55-58 loss to North Carolina in 2021. So yeah, that's and he had 5 touchdowns in the game before, 3 passing and 2 rushing. So yeah, Sam Hartman has had some games like that before in his career. He had another 5. So this is what I keep saying about why I'm excited about this team. Sam Hartman in 3 years against North Carolina had 11, 15. He had 15 touchdowns in 3 years against North Carolina, and they lost every single game.
It's insane.
That's not happening at Notre Dame. That's right. In that nut, they scored in the 50s twice. Their low point, that was like 34, and they lost all 3 of those games. That doesn't happen at Notre Dame. You put up those kind of numbers, you're killing people.
Yes.
Especially now in the new overtime rules, Ryan, where, I mean, you can't even – it's like it used to be back like not that long ago where you could have like 8 touchdowns in a game because you played like 9 over. Remember that 74-72 A&M LSU game? Wasn't like 24-24 at the end of regulation or something like that. It was like nuts. But nowadays it's like what? You go for 2 after the second overtime, right? So you can't even get any touchdowns after that. So it'll be interesting. But fun question. I like those. Last 2 here real quick. Chief Brody says, if Jimmy Clausen was on Notre Dame in 17-20, how many natties would they have won? Oh, man. I'd say, this is going to sound nuts, I'd say 1. I think they would have won 17 or 18. One of those 2 years. One of those 2 years, I think that, because like him throwing to Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool in 18 would have been pretty good, but that Clemson team was really, really good. But that would have been a heck of a duel, Ryan. Jimmy Clausen against Trevor Lawrence with those guys at receiver. And then 17, I still say this too. If Notre Dame had a legit quarterback in 17, they they could have been the best team in college football that year. I mean, that would have been a very dangerous team. Very dangerous team. The other part of it, too, is I don't think there was any great teams in college football that year. Actually, I thought the best team that year was Oklahoma. I really did. And their defense just could not stop Georgia at all. I still think Georgia would have beat. I think whoever won the Georgia-Oklahoma game was going to win the title, but Georgia just at the time couldn't figure Bama out. That was not a great Bama team. That was a great coaching job by Nick Saban, but that was not a great Bama team. And I think Notre Dame could have beat Bama that year with Jimmy Clausen at quarterback, not Brandon Wimbush, but with Jimmy Clausen at quarterback. I think they could have beat him with Everett Golson at quarterback. I think could have beat him with some other guys at quarterback. But if Deshaun Kaiser would have come back in 2017 with a better attitude, I think that 17 team would have been dangerous. Like if he would have had a grow up moment after 16 and come back in 17, that team would have been really hard to beat. Really hard to beat.
Deshaun was so talented, man. It's a shame. He was so talented.
Just goes to show how much attitude matters. Absolutely attitude matters.
Intangibles, man.
Yeah.
Intangibles.
And I've had people say, no way he beats Clemson. I'm telling y'all, I was at that game. Notre Dame receivers were getting open all game long against Clemson. And Ian just wouldn't throw the ball. Jimmy makes those throws. There's no doubt about it. Now, would they have won? I don't know. That was a great Clemson team. But that game was a whole lot more competitive early on than 3-0. I mean, than 30-3. Flat out. So that would have been a much more competitive game. But, would they have won? That's Ryan, that's asking a lot. Yeah. That 2018 team for Clemson was really good.
Yes, it was.
Really good.
Well, that's like if you drop it into 2020, it's like that Alabama team was really good in 2020. Yeah. That was a really good Alabama team.
Could they have made it competitive? Absolutely.
Sure.
You know what it would have looked like, Ryan? It would have looked a lot like the Florida game where, hey, we can score on you, but we're never going to stop you enough to win. I mean, the A&M game was kind of like that a little bit that year as well, early on, and then Bama just steamrolled them in the second half. But those are the different things that you look at and say, man, that would have made it a lot more competitive. But that's why I keep going back to 2017, because part of it is you take the best Notre Dame team, you take that 2015 team, give them the coaching staff that they had in 17, and I say, boy, that team could have beat anybody in 2015. But you take all that and turn it into 2019, and guess what? They're still getting beat by LSU, right? I mean, that's just they still probably lose to Bama in 2020. I mean, it's just one of those things where part of it is just who do you play? I mean, it just happened that there's this generational team. That 2019 Clemson team was pretty good. They were not in the same league as LSU. I mean, they just weren't. So that's part of it too, Ryan, is just some luck. I mean, I've had people make the argument that the 2015 Clemson team was better than the 2016 Clemson team. And I think that I'm sympathetic to that argument. The difference is they played a better Bama team in 2015 than they did in 2016. There was no Derrick Henry in 2015 or in 2016. You know what I mean? And so that's part of it. That's part of the deal. I've argued this before. The 89 Notre Dame team was better than the 88 team from a dominance and a talent standpoint. It was. But they had Miami on the road one year and Miami at home the other year, and that's why the one team won it and the other team didn't. So it's just part of the deal sometimes. It's kind of like when we talked about the Bills earlier, Ryan. There were some teams that won Super Bowls that the Buffalo Bills probably would have smacked a little bit. They just happened to play during a stretch when, they played two Cowboys teams and a Redskins team that were pretty flipping good that not a lot of people were going to beat. So
I wonder if you add up all yardage from high school, college, and NFL careers, if Derrick Henry has the most rush of all time.
He's got to be in the conversation, right? I mean,
has to be, right?
I mean, I know it. Let me look up his college stats, because I know Herschel Walker had some crazy high school numbers. Let me see because here's the thing what hurts Derrick Henry, because he was really only the featured back that 1 year.
Right.
He only finished his career at 3,500 yards. So I'll tell you what, I don't know if he would have had. I'm actually curious, because I know Darius Walker had some crazy high school numbers. And in high school, Darius Walker rushed for 5,676 yards in college, in high school. But then Darius had some pretty good years in college too. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's some back. Herschel Walker had crazy numbers. So I'd be very curious because didn't Derrick Henry rush for like 7,000 yards or something like that in
I
high
think it was
school?
more than that. I think it was more than that. I think it was like
Because you and I were
10,000
talking about it on a show one time
Yeah.
recently where we were like his numbers in high school were nuts. Let me pull those up. All right, for his career. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. He had 12,000 yards of rushing in high school. Yeah. He still might have it. Even I forgot about that because we were talking about this one time, Ryan. He had 12,000 rushing yards in high school, 153 touchdowns. Yes. And then 3,500. Yes. There's nobody comes close to that. Nobody.
He has 25,000 yards rushing between those three levels.
That's nuts. That's nuts.
That's insane.
And he's still a functioning human being. With all those
he's
carries.
still a good running back in the NFL. Like,
yes,
yeah.
he's that's insane.
He's an alien.
That's
man.
absolutely insane. Oh man, he's fun to watch. He said Andrew Gilmore. There was a Iowa State running back in the 1990s who ran for 20 years. That's Troy Davis. You remember him?
Troy Davis. Yes.
Is who he's talking about. But Troy Davis, I think, only had like 2 years at Iowa State because he did not finish his career as the college football all-time leading rusher. He had, I think, back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons. Yes. So Troy Davis in 94 and 96 or 95 and 96 had over 2,000 yards, but he only had 187 as a rookie. As a freshman. So he only had 4,300 yards. But do you know who the all-time leading rusher in college football is?
Donnell Pumphrey.
Yeah, that's right. That's
right. Well, technically it's Danny Woodhead, but we'll go with Donnell Pumphrey for D1 stuff.
Division I, yes. Because then you start getting into like dudes of Mount Union's put out. Yeah, it's no. I still say that I still kind of go with Ron Dane. With Donnell Pumphrey, I kind of give him a little bit of an asterisk on that one because he played way more games. Yes. Ron Dane, I think, played like 43 games in his career. Donnell Pumphrey played like 50 something, right? Yep. I mean, so it's a little different animal, and he still barely beat Ron Dane in numbers. So yeah, it's a little bit of a different deal.
Well, you want to talk about someone that would have shattered it though? If Jonathan Taylor would have played a fourth year, he probably would have shattered that record.
Yes, yes. Well, Herschel Walker too. I mean, if Herschel Walker would have played his senior year of college as well, he would have had some crazy numbers because he had. Where was he at? He had 5,200 yards in 3 years. His quote unquote worst year as a rusher was as a freshman. He had 1,600 yards. And here's the crazy thing, Ryan: never played more than 11 games, and they didn't count bowl games back then as in part of your stats. So Herschel would have had some monster numbers back in the day, man. All right, last question here.
Jonathan Taylor, 6,174 yards in 3 years. His lowest rusher was 1,977 yards.
How many games?
He played in 14, 13, and 14. So
exactly
41 games. 41 games.
Exactly. How many did he have per game? Does it say, Ryan? Like, what was his average per game?
I can do the math real quick. 6,174. By 41. So in 3 years, he averaged 150.6 yards a game rushing.
Herschel Walker's a 159.4.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And don't make them like they used to, Ryan. And that's why you enjoy when guys like Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor come along. You enjoy them.
Yes,
you really enjoy them. Another guy that put up some great numbers, and he would have had some really impressive numbers if he would have played his fifth season. Or fourth season is J.K. Dobbins, because I mean he would have had another 2,000-yard year in my opinion if he'd have come back for a senior year, and he finished with 44.59. So he would have been well, no, he wouldn't have. You know what? I take that back. He wouldn't have, because that would have been 2020, and he only would have played 8 games because Ohio State did all their that Big Ten did all their craziness. So his senior year would have been during the COVID year, so he still would have had over 1,000 yards, but he would have had the big year that he had. So
JK was stupid, man. He was a stupid.
He was really good. He was
really
really good. Yep. You know, what's funny is somebody asked thoughts on Ricky Williams. He was so awesome. Honestly, Ricky Williams and Ron Dane do not get nearly the love that they should. They were tremendously, but they just weren't sexy backs, and they weren't sexy characters. Ricky was really quiet. He wasn't a me guy. He wasn't a, go out and be in the media. Didn't have his own, all those different. He just wanted to just be out of the spotlight. And Ron Dane played in Wisconsin. You know what I mean? And he didn't look like a great athlete, So they just don't get that same flash. But man, there's been some great running backs over the years. There's no doubt about that. And then last question. Actually, let's wrap it up there, Ryan. So that was a fun conversation. We're going to wrap it up there. Why don't you take us out of here, Mr. Roberts?
Yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed a little bit of Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Obviously dove in, if you missed the first section of this podcast, dove heavy into some updates for the 2024 class. Next week, we'll be really starting to get into the 2025 class to give you all a little bit of insight into some of the top players positionally that you need to know in Notre Dame. So before you get out of here, Brian Roberts, Brian Driscoll, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the podcast. You get that notification bell as well. We'll be back tonight, 6 o'clock Eastern time for IB Nation Sports Talk. And, of course, we'll be back tomorrow in the regular 1 o'clock slots as we continue to work through the offseason as we inch closer and closer to college football. So join irishbreakdown.com at the premium message board. You can sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com. A lot more intel, recruiting, and team-wise as, again, we inch closer. The end of July, team players are going to start reporting to camp. I have a big recruiting event, obviously, as well, the barbecue at the end of the month. So make sure that you stay locked in at irishbreakdown.com for your all fixes that you need for Notre Dame football. Thank you all so much again for joining us today on the Recruiting Hour on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.